Kicking off at number 5, the Silver Woman. And this story comes from a police motorway patrol woman from Portsmouth, England, who explains that her career regularly confronts her with situations that are both bizarre and unnerving. But this one kind of takes the cake. On the 25th of November around 6:30 PM during a routine speed camera setup in the Portsmouth city centre, her speed trap began picking up random tracings of non-existent objects in pitch black darkness, hurtling past her vehicle at around 30 to 40 miles per hour. Now, I know what you might be thinking, the device was obviously malfunctioning, but that wasn't the case, and our police officer had already thought of that. She trained the camera manually back onto the road surface to see what had been picked up, and she was shocked to discover that on the screen was what could only be described as humanoid figures running up and down the street at about 40 feet ahead of the vehicle. Strangely enough, they seemed to have a silver appearance to them, almost shimmering and translucent. She looked out of the window and again, nothing was there, but when she looked back at the screen, about 10 feet away from the vehicle was one of the same silvery entities standing motionless, facing away from the van, hulking and breathing in a strange fashion, as if they were weighing up taking on the police officer. What were they? Well, we'll never know, and when she played the tape back for her fellow officers, the silvery entities were nowhere to be seen. Yeah, I've got no clue about this one. Coming in at number 4, the Folk Monster. Now, Bigfoot is obviously the heavy hitter of the cryptid world. People have devoted their entire lives to hunting down the elusive mountain creature, stretching all the way across the wildlands of North America, as well as similar instances across the planet. But there is one little town in America that seems to be the hotspot for these sightings: Folk, Arkansas, and in 1971 it became the scene of its most terrifying legend. Meet Bobby Ford, a man who vehemently claims he's seen Bigfoot, or a version of it, describing it as 7 feet tall, ridiculously fast and covered in long brown hair. And he saw it up close and personal. It was a Saturday when Bobby and his brother were out hunting a short distance from their rural home when they heard screams in the distance. Bobby's wife, Elizabeth Ford, was frozen in horror when a creature reached through the front window, massive and hairy with glowing red eyes that made no sound except for heavy breathing. When Bobby and his brother ran back to the home, the creature turned and grabbed him as he sprinted up to the porch. It tackled him to the ground with ease and then disappeared into the woodland. The creature had left behind clear tracks in the house and nearby area, 3-toed footprints that matched the deep 3-fingered scratches that were made in the wood of the front porch. Bobby Ford was rushed to hospital and treated for minor wounds and shock, and the family were so terrified by the encounter that they moved out. They'd only lived there a week. That's terrible timing. Next up at number 3, the Grey Man of Ben Macdui. Ben Macdui in Gaelic, Mountain of the Son of Duff, is an awe-inspiring peak of the Scottish Highlands, staking the claim as one of Britain's highest mountains and the highest of the Cairngorms National Park. It's been scaled by countless people throughout history, but there are those that claim that there's something more sinister living out on the mountain: the Grey Man of Ben Macdui, and it doesn't like visitors. The creature is said to be at least 20 feet tall, and one eyewitness to the creature's presence, a respected professor and mountain climber named Norman Colley, said that he was first aware of something following him during his ascent after hearing strange footsteps behind him. Alone, isolated on the mountain, something was following him. And it wasn't human. The footsteps were laborious and delayed, as if that whatever was following him was much, much taller than he was. When he saw it, he described the Grey Man as vaguely human-shaped, brown in hue and fur, and shrouded in a strange grey mist. In 1945, a similar thing happened to a renowned mountain climber named Peter Densham, who described the exact same encounter with the exact same creature. Again, in 1958, the Scots magazine wrote of a similar account from naturalist Alexander Tunion, who this time found himself armed with a rifle and fired several rounds into the Grey Man. He thought he'd hit it, whatever it was, but after trekking over through the snow, found no sign of the creature. It vanished away like fog rolling across a mountain, and the mystery of the Grey Man of Ben Macdui remains unsolved. Swinging in at number 2, the Cabbagetown Tunnel Monster, which is an urban legend from my current stomping grounds of Toronto, Ontario, that is grounded in such bizarre circumstances that it remains a warning not to go wandering through the dark tunnels of downtown Toronto. I'm talking about the Path. Ever. Don't go there. In 1978, in the eastern Cabbagetown district of Toronto, a 51-year-old man known as Ernest had a terrifying encounter in the network of tunnels that sprawl beneath the city. He had been out searching the neighborhood for a missing kitten that him and his wife had been raising when he stumbled across a tunnel entrance and decided to explore. After venturing 10 feet into the gloom, Ernest suddenly came across a creature that looked somewhat like a long, thin monkey, around 3 feet in height, with large teeth and covered in grey fur. It had unsettling eyes, he described, that peered out of the darkness in a bright orange hue. Even more unsettling, Ernest claimed that the creature spoke to him. "Go away, go away," it said in a hissing voice before slinking down a tunnel off onto the side. Ernest was reluctant to come forward with his story. He was a respected member of the community and he feared that he'd be ridiculed by his peers, but after being convinced by a friend, he spoke to the Toronto Sun, and a group of journalists and investigators followed him into the same tunnel. Although they didn't see the creature, they did see that the narrow tunnel led to a strange, gloomy chasm that dropped into the unseen sewer system below. And even stranger, they found the maimed, half-eaten carcass of a cat buried loosely beneath the dirt and debris. It permeated the legend of the Cabbagetown tunnel monster, and whatever it was, we may never know for sure. Just stay away. And finally, our number one spot, the Jersey Devil. Of course, it has to be perhaps one of the most notorious cryptids of all time, the famed Devil of Jersey, whose origin dates all the way back to when New Jersey was still a British colony. Hundreds upon hundreds of tales have been spawned from the legend of the Jersey Devil, dating from the early 1700s right up to recent times. As the legend goes, Mrs. Jane Leeds came from a poor family who carved out an existence in the bleak pine barrens of Jersey, a rugged place with dense forests, sandy soil and deep swamps. In 1735, Mrs. Leeds discovered that she was pregnant with her 13th child, which is, as they say, unlucky for some. Now, Mrs. Leeds wasn't too keen on giving birth, to say the least, and she claimed to friends and relatives that the devil can take the next one. And that's exactly what he did. When the baby was born, it was monstrous, with a scaly reptilian body, a horse's head, bat's wings and a long forked tail. He spread his wings, shot up out of the chimney and soared out across the pine barrens. The legend of the Jersey Devil was born. Now, whatever you think of this cryptid, truth or urban legend, it's the frequency that the Jersey Devil appears in contemporary folklore that is important. Hundreds of people have reported sightings of a strange bat-like creature with wings and a forked tail, flapping its wings across the pine barrens and cackling into the night. In 1816, Joseph Bonaparte, the brother of Napoleon, reported seeing the creature while hunting game in the woods. In 1840, a respected minister pointed his congregation towards a ghastly creature flapping above his church, and in 1909, literally thousands of people saw the same creature on the same day, at the same time, at multiple locations. In fact, it got so bad that schools had to close down and people just flat out refused to go outside. And still, to this day, New Jersey natives will warn you to tread carefully. Kicking off at number 5, the Loveland Frogmen. Hailing from the misty swamps and vast wetlands of rural Ohio, the Loveland Frogmen, also affectionately known as the Loveland Lizards, are a cryptid unlike no other and have reportedly appeared under several bizarre circumstances on a regular basis in Ohio's Clermont County. Allegedly, the first sightings of these eerie bipedal amphibians first occurred in 1955 and has proven to be one of the most intriguing cryptozoological mysteries in North America. The creatures themselves allegedly live in the temperate forests and wetlands of Clermont County and are able to survive the cold winters of the region without having to hibernate. Useful. During their first sighting at approximately 3:30 AM, a local businessman was driven down a lonely stretch of road running alongside the Miami River on the outskirts of the small town known as Loveland, Ohio. Suddenly and out of nowhere, the man claimed to have witnessed 3 bipedal quasi-reptilian entities emerge from the dense reeds and begin to congregate by the side of the road. The man slowed down and turned out his lights as he pulled his car up to a curb to observe these creatures further. He claimed that they stood between 3 and 4 feet tall, were covered with leathery skin and had webbed hands and feet. Their most distinguishing feature, though, was their distinctly frog-like head, which the man claimed bore deep wrinkles where their hair should have been. Well, since then, over 5 more sightings of the Loveland Frogmen have occurred over a 60-year period. What do you guys think? What's going on, Ohio? Next up at number 4, the nameless thing of Berkeley Square. And I absolutely love this story either way, because if you've ever heard of the famed 50 Berkeley Square in London, England, then you'll know that, cryptid or not, this place is terrifying enough. It's proof as well that there are some cases out there which irk on the realm of the paranormal and become a category so unexplainable that they don't really fit into anything, or can fit into anything. I don't know, it's pretty nebulous. Either way though, the haunted legacy of Berkeley Square has featured ghosts and poltergeists the world over, and it's widely considered to be one of the most haunted places in England. But there is one particular instance that takes the cake, the nameless thing of Berkeley Square. A tale that takes place in 1840 when a 20-year-old Sir Robert Warboys got into a drunken dare in which he had written off Berkeley Square and its paranormal reputation as a whole load of Kaiser Soze. He put money down that he could spend the night in the building's most cursed and haunted second floor, and so the next evening did exactly that, with a pistol in his hand. For robbers, I guess, and a makeshift pulley line attached to a bell in case he saw anything out of the ordinary. He drank a whole load of courage and tried to get some shut-eye, but well, of course, young Bobby Warboys' story cuts out there when the landlord was awoken by the bell rig ringing incessantly and ran upstairs to check on him. He found Robert Warboys dead as a doornail, slouched in the corner with his eyes bulging in terror. Legend has it that the landlord witnessed an amorphous, shadowy form with slime oozing from it, claws and tentacles and all dripping from its form, suddenly slink back into the shadows of the corner of the room and disappear. And since then, tales of the nameless thing of Berkeley Square are more common than any of us would actually like. Swinging in at number 3, the Kinderhook Blob, which is just a great name, really, isn't it? And if I'm being honest, the legend of the Kinderhook Blob is exactly what cryptid tales are made of, so strap in. It's sometime in 1962 New York, and on 6 separate occasions, multiple witnesses encountered a floating, mysterious blob-like creature that was so terrifying in its form that 2 men armed with shotguns fled in terror. The initial encounter was from a 10-year-old boy named Hallenbeck and his 7-year-old cousin Chari. They were playing in the dense woods nearby their house when all of a sudden they both heard this really high-pitched whistle noise, and suddenly, from behind a nearby pine tree, they witnessed a white amorphous object appear in full view, which slowly began writhing toward them. On 5 more occasions, which insanely would happen over the next 12 years, all the way until 1978, dozens of eyewitnesses would explain in vivid detail similar accounts of an amorphous white blob-like creature that would emerge from the woods, often attaching its tendrils to trees whilst incessantly making its way towards its victims, causing them to flee in terror. So much so that on one occasion 2 grown men tried blowing it to pieces with shotguns to no avail and then turned tail and ran. What I love about this story is the essence of a cryptid tale. For all intents and purposes, the Kinderhook Blob could be a disused weather balloon floating listlessly through the air, but because it was seen multiple times by multiple people in the right setting, the legend of the terrifying white blob quickly became a horrifying reality. Either that or it's a sentient alien life form that's going to consume us all, so yeah. Coming in next at number 2, the disappearance of Peter Grayson. The Groot slang, or the Groot slang, which in Afrikaans loosely translates to big snake, is a legendary creature widely considered to be one of the continent's most prolific cryptids, and is reputed to dwell exclusively in the deep caves and cavernous systems in the Richtersveld, South Africa. According to legend, the Groot slang is a primordial creature that is reputedly as old as the world itself and dwells within what locals refer to as the bottomless pit, which also, conveniently enough, is also filled with precious diamonds. Well, diamonds historically have a proficiency of attracting daring adventurers, and one of those adventurers just so happened to be an English businessman known as Peter Grayson. In 1917, Grayson and a team of excavators began an expedition into the Richtersveld cave system, accompanied by several local guides. After heading out into the rocky desert landscape, and upon hearing that Grayson intended to descend into the bottomless pit, unwittingly the lair of the Groot slang, the local guides quickly left after warning Grayson that they'd lost friends and family to the violent serpent before, and they weren't going to do it again. He shrugged it off and alongside his 2 excavators headed deep into the cave, and well, that's the last that they heard of any of them. The Grayson dynasty faded into obscurity after their patriarch was never seen alive again, but as the legend goes, one of the local guides returned to the cave a day or so later after feeling guilty for abandoning Grayson and his team. At the entrance of the cave, he found the body of an excavator, half of his body actually, to be specific. His legs and most of his torso had been ripped clean off, and he died attempting to crawl back out. What a way to go. And finally, coming in at our number 1 spot, the legend of Yuri Grando. And I just have to tell this cryptid story because it's one of my favourites, and it's also considered to be one of the first historical instances of vampirism. As the legend goes, Yuri Grando Aljovic was a villager and poor peasant from the region of Istria, which now makes up modern-day Croatia. Historically, he was referred to as a strigoi, strigon or strigun, a local word for something that resembles a vampire and a warlock. Sometime around 1656, Yuri died due to an unknown illness, but but according to legend, he regularly returned from the grave at night as a vampire to terrorize his village until his decapitation in 1672. The legend tells that for 16 years after his death, Ure would rise from his grave by night and terrorize the village. The village priest Giorgio, who had buried Ure 16 years previously, discovered that at night somebody would knock on the doors around the village, and on whichever door he knocked, someone from that house would die within the next few days. Eventually, the villagers rallied after witnesses saw the corpse of Ure roaming the streets, and led by the town's mayor, chased and tried to kill him with a hawthorn stick, but failed to pierce his supernatural flesh. The next night, 9 people went to the graveyard and dug up Ure's coffin, finding a perfectly preserved corpse with a smile on its face. It was Ure with pristine white flesh and no signs of decomposition. They tried to stake him once more, but witnesses noted that the stick would not penetrate its flesh. Eventually, the villagers were so terrified and kind of fed up with his vampire antics that a brave villager known as Stipan Milicic took a saw and decapitated the corpse. As soon as it tore Ure's skin, the vampire screamed and blood began gushing from the cut. Allegedly, a man that was presumed dead for 16 years. Yeah. That one's pretty worrying, right?
In at number 5, we have the Jersey Devil. Known to exist in the Pine Barrens of New Jersey, the Jersey Devil is often described as having hooves. A snake's tail, bat wings, and a head that looks something like a horse. There have been many sightings throughout history of the Jersey Devil, with the cryptid dating all the way back to the 1700s and continuing on until the past decade. It is said that the Jersey Devil often glows and can breathe fire or poison water with its breath. Throughout folklore, it is also known as the Leeds Devil, with local residents tracing its origins to a woman named Mother Leeds, the mistress of a British soldier who was suspected of being a witch. When she gave birth to her 13th child, she cursed it. The baby was born as a hairy creature and soon began terrorizing the town and its people, even eating children. Now, like I said, there have been many sightings throughout history. On July 27, 1937, an unknown animal with red eyes seen by residents of Downingtown, Pennsylvania, was compared to the Jersey Devil by a reporter for the Pennsylvania Bulletin of July 28, 1937. In 1951, a group of Gibbstown, New Jersey boys claimed to have seen a monster matching the devil's description, and claims of a corpse matching the Jersey Devil's description arose in 1957. Now, many choose to ignore the Jersey Devil, with it thought to be an undiscovered species of animal, generally classified as living pre-pterodactyl. Coming in at number 4, we have Yowie. Yowie, also known as Yehu, Yori, Hairy Man, or Yahoo, is a fanged humanoid creature or great ape featured in Aboriginal mythology along with Australian raptors or Burrinjaw. It is considered to be the Australian Bigfoot and contains many primate-like features, indicating that it is an undiscovered species of great ape. Yowie is described as being one of the most aggressive Sasquatch species and has been reported ripping the heads off of kangaroos and dogs. In the past, it has been described to be around 7 to 9 feet tall, with a large red mouth and talon-like claws, according to Aboriginal legends. It is also noted as having 2 large fang-like canines, which distinguish the Yowie from the other Bigfoot species. There are around 140 placental mammals known to exist in Australia, most belonging to the order Chiroptera and Rodentia. Some cryptozoologists theorize that the Yowie could be some form of bipedal marsupial, such as a descendant of the New Guinea Holothurium. Coming in at number 3, we have Mongolian death worm. The Mongolian death worm, also known as its native name, Olgoi korakoi, meaning intestine worm, due to its red blood-like color and size, which is the size of an intestine. It has often been described as around 2 to 7 feet long and possesses the ability to spit out a corrosive yellow saliva and generate blasts of electricity. Mongolian nomads believe the giant worm covers its prey with an acidic substance that turns everything a corroded yellow color. Legend has it that as a creature begins to attack, it raises half of its body out of the sand and starts to inflate until it explodes, releasing the lethal poison all over the victim. It is said that the livestock and humans are its main prey, and because Mongolia had been under Soviet control until 1990, there is very little known about the cryptid. Nobody is entirely sure what the worm actually is, with some experts claiming it to be fake due to the Gobi Desert being too hot an area for annelids to survive. Some have suggested it might be a skink, but they are said to have little legs and scaly skin, whereas witness accounts have specified that the worm is limbless and smooth-bodied. In 2005, an expedition from the Center for Fortean Zoology crossed 1,000 miles of the Gobi on the track of the death worm. They concluded it was likely a large unknown type of worm lizard, and the powers that were attributed to it were apocryphal. Coming in at number 2, we have Ahul. The Ahul, or the Athol, is a winged cryptid often portrayed as a giant bat or even a flying primate depending on the variation. Tales tell of it living in the deepest parts of the jungle of Java and can be found across most of Indonesia. Subspecies can be found on the neighbouring islands of New Guinea in the form of the ropen, a presumed cousin to the Ahul. The ropen aptly translates to demon flying and is also said to be a big bat, or more commonly a pterosaur. It is said to produce a light, possibly to attract fish. The ropen is said to have a long snout, large wings, and a long thin crest. It has a distinct face that has features of both a chimpanzee's and a bat's, large dark eyes, red-skinned wings, large claws on its forearms, and is covered in grey fur. It is also noted as having a wingspan of 18 to 28 feet and is said to be the largest bat known to mankind. Now back to the Ahuls. They are said to be covered in a thick brown or black fur much like fruit bats, but unlike bats have a long, powerful legs and claws and are supposedly capable of pouncing on and snatching up living prey, including humans. Sightings of these winged beasts are often dismissed simply as mistaken glimpses of owls, eagles, and other large birds of prey that inhabit the rainforests. However, many sources can confirm that the beast does in fact exist, and may even be an isolated and undiscovered species. And finally, coming in at number 1, we have Black Shuck. Black Shuck, or Old Shuck, or simply Shuck, is the name given to an unknown creature which is said to roam in East Anglia. It is one of the many ghostly black dogs recorded across the British Isles. The Black Shuck is often recorded as an omen of death, and some occasions a more companionable animal. Although it is classified as a cryptid, there have been various sightings and reports of the animal's appearance throughout the United Kingdom. For centuries throughout England, many have told tales of large black dogs with malevolent flaming eyes are often depicted as red or sometimes green. According to reports, the beast varies in size and stature from that of simply a large dog to being the size of a calf or even a horse. Other accounts report that Black Shuck as floating on a carpet of mist, or even appearing headless. According to folklore, the Shuck haunts East Anglia, primarily coastline, graveyard, side roads, body of water, and dark forest. W.A. Dutt, in his 1901 Highways and Byways in East Anglia, describes the creature, I quote, "He takes the form of a huge black dog and prowls along the dark lanes and lonesome field footpaths where, although his howling makes the hearer's blood run cold, his footfalls make no sound. You may know him at once, should you see him, by his fiery eye. He has but one, and like the Cyclops, is in the middle of his head. But such an encounter might bring you the worst of luck. It is even said that to meet him is to be warned that your death will occur before the end of the year." As I stated before, the Black Shuck has been reported many times, with one of the most notable reports being the appearance at the churches of Bungay and Blyberg in Suffolk. On August 4th, 1957, Black Shuck was said to have burst in through the church doors to a clap of thunder. He ran up to the nave, past a large congregation, killing a man and a boy and causing the church steeple to collapse through the roof. As the dog left, he left scorch marks on the door, which can be seen at the church even to this day.
Starting off this countdown, we have the Mothman. The legend of the Mothman is a really freaking eerie one. So the Mothman originates from West Virginia folklore. Apparently, it's a large 10-foot tall gray creature with red glowing eyes and wings, and has the ability to fly over 100 miles per hour, so he's pretty damn fast. This creature has been spotted on a number of occasions. In particular, it's believed that once you see him, bad things are going to happen, so he's kinda like an omen. The first report of this creature was on November 15th, 1966. On this night, two sets of young couples drove out to Lover's Lane to get frisky in their cars. It was Roger and Linda Scarberry and Steve and Mary Mallet. That's when one of the couples noticed a massive creature with red glowing eyes watching them from afar. The couple, Roger and Linda, freaked out and sped on out of there, but the Mothman followed their car and tried to attack them. Thankfully, they made it out alright, but they were hella spooked and reported their encounter to the police. During the next couple of days, a number of different people reported similar encounters to the police as well. Like two volunteer firemen claimed they saw a large bird with red eyes. Then a contractor named Newell Partridge was out in a field at night when he saw the creature in the distance. He shined his light in his eyes and he said they glowed like bicycle reflectors. He then went on to blame this creature for the disappearance appearance of his German Shepherd. So people all around town were hella freaked out. The scariest sighting would have to be in 1967, around the time the Silver Bridge collapsed. Apparently, people who saw the Mothman then went on to receive premonitions of the bridge collapsing and experienced terrible nightmares. And on the day that the bridge actually did collapse, a number of witnesses claimed that they saw the Mothman perched nearby just watching. That's creepy. As long as he doesn't come to Canada though, I'm good. In our fourth spot today we have the red-eyed roadside cryptid. This is the name given to a creature that a man named Britton saw one early morning in Texas. So it was June 20th, 2000 at around 1 a.m. He had just gotten off work and was headed home. Now on the route that he takes, he explained that there's this 90-degree turn and you have to go really slow and be careful because sometimes they find cattle out on the road. So he was making his turn when all of a sudden he saw it. And he knew right away it was not an animal of any sorts. This creature had red eyes and was on 2 feet and had black hair all over its body. So Britton, being the curious man that he was, got out of his truck and shined a flashlight at this creature. That's when the creature raised its arm above its head and let out an ear-piercing scream. It then turned around and ran behind a house. So the man immediately got back in his truck and drove away in disbelief of what he just saw. But according to him, he has heard the scream at night before, but he never knew where it was coming from or who or what was making this noise. After doing research, he found out that this creature he saw is related to the Bigfoot. Sounds like it's Bigfoot's noisy younger cousin. Either way, be careful when driving late at night. In our third spot, we have the Shuck. The Shuck is a ghostly black dog from East England legends. Don't be fooled though, this dog is anything but cute, cuddly, and friendly. It's got a thirst for blood. Those who have seen it describes it as a big black hound. Some even say it has red or green glowing eyes. Now this ghost dog is said to terrorize rural towns and villages across the country. The most famous as well as most horrifying encounter would be from 1577. One night a bunch of villagers had to seek shelter in a church during a huge thunderstorm. As they were huddled in there, a big black dog burst through the church door and attacked a man and his son. It also knocked down one of the church's pillars, so a part of it actually collapsed. It then ran out of the church, and as it did, it apparently left scorch marks on the wood of the church floor and door. Those marks are apparently still there today. People were horrified by this encounter, and that's how the legend of the Shuck came to life. In our second spot, we have the Green Beach Monster. This is apparently a very strong and scaly, slimy beast that hunts for prey in Ohio rivers. The first encounter happened to a woman named Miss Johnson and her friend. It was August 21st of 1955, and the two ladies were enjoying a swim in a river. One of the ladies was in an inflatable tube, just, relaxing, while Mrs. Johnson swam by. That's when all of a sudden she was dragged underwater. She struggled to free herself, and thankfully she managed to. She resurfaced only to be dragged under again. Thankfully, Miss Johnson managed to free herself once again. She did so by kicking this thing. According to Miss Johnson, the hand that grabbed her was large and hairy and had sharp nails or claws. She also knew that this beast was large and strong just based on the way it grabbed her and pulled her down and held her down. In fact, Miss Johnson was left with multiple bruises and wounds on her leg from this creature. Without this, people probably would have thought that she was just lying. But she had a full-on claw print bruise on her leg. Obviously, the two reported the encounter to the police, and that's when they got a visit from an Air Force colonel. He interviewed them both and took very detailed notes. Before he left, he warned the two women to never mention this encounter ever again. And I mean, that sounds hella suspicious. As if the government had captured this cryptid and then it escaped and they didn't want people to know. So anyway, they should get one of those memory erasers from Men in Black. You know what I'm talking about, the little psh. And in a number one spot today we have the Jersey Devil. The Jersey Devil is a very famous cryptid said to live in the Pine Barrens region of New Jersey. Legend goes that in 1735 a mother gave birth to a child that she did not want. Her and her husband couldn't afford to raise another child. Apparently she had 12 children already, and after she found out she was pregnant again, she cursed the child and said it was a devil child. In fact, one version of the story, apparently she offered her unborn son to the devil. Anyways, she ended up giving birth to the child and all was well and normal. But as days went by, the kid started to transition into this weird creature. It grew hooves, it had a goat's head and bat wings and a forked tail. It would growl and scream. In another version, the mother was actually apparently a witch and the child's father was the devil himself. And that was the creature that they gave birth to. Either way, it's creepy as hell. So there have been reported sightings of this creature as early as the 1820s. Some say it has a horse's head, long claws, and bat-like wings, whereas others say it looks like a kangaroo with wings. In 1909, that's when this creature terrorized New Jersey. Tons of people were apparently seeing this creature. In fact, due to all the sightings, workers were advised to stay home and schools were closed. Just saying that if they thought that this creature was fake, none of that would have happened, so they were scared for a reason. Eventually, the hype around the Jersey Devil died down. That was until 1927. A taxi driver in Salem City was minding his own business when apparently he encountered this beast. The beast was then following the man and was pounding on the roof of his taxi. Hey, I don't know, maybe he just needed a lift. Then in the 1960s, residents were woken up in the middle of the night to strange screaming. They all knew that this was the cries from the Jersey Devil. And in 1980, the Jersey Devil struck again. Officers and forest rangers were called onto a scene at a farm where a bunch of pigs had been killed. Their bodies were all scratched and ripped open, the back of their heads were eaten. But there was no blood on the ground. There's no explanation for what could have done this to the pigs, besides the legendary Jersey Devil.
Coming in at 5, the Jersey Devil. In southern New Jersey, the Jersey Devil is a legendary creature that is said to inhabit the Pine Barrens of South Jersey. The creature is described as a flying biped with hooves, however there are many variations. The most common description is that of a kangaroo-like or wyvern-like creature with a goat or horse-like head. Leathery bat-like wings, horns, small arms with clawed hands, legs with cloven hooves, and a forked tail. It is often reported as moving quickly and emitting a high-pitched blood-curdling scream. Now, the legend originated with a Pine Barrens resident named Jane Leeds, known as Mother Leeds. The legend goes that Mother Leeds had 12 children, and after finding out she was pregnant for the 13th time, cursed the child in frustration, crying that the child would be the devil. During 1735, Mother Leeds was in labour on a stormy night while her friends gathered around her. Born as a normal child, the 13th child changed to a creature with hooves, a goat's head, bat wings, and a forked tail. The child then supposedly began flying around wreaking havoc. Now, the legend certainly has some staying power considering that nearly 200 years later, the devil became a big deal once again, this time in 1909. That January, reports of odd footprints being found in the snow on the roofs of houses caused such a panic that the devil was up to no good that mills and schools closed and some people were too scared to leave their homes. Since then, the Jersey Devil has been to blame for most strange happenings around New Jersey, and in 1960, Camden's merchants even offered a $10,000 bounty to anyone who would capture the mischievous devil, but of course they never received any takers. It's also mischievous. We Brits know what's right. Coming in at 4, Bunnyman. The Bunnyman is an urban legend that originated after 2 incidents in Fairfax County, Virginia, back in 1970. The legend, like many others, has multiple variations, most involving a man wearing a rabbit costume who attacks people with an axe or hatchet. Now, most of the stories hail from a southern railway overpass spanning Colchester Road near Clifton, Virginia, often referred to as Bunnyman Bridge. The legend surfaced after Fairfax County Public Library historian and archivist Brian A. Conley extensively researched the Bunnyman legend. He located 2 incidents of a man in a rabbit costume threatening people with an axe, the reports occurring 10 days apart in 1970. Now, the second reported sighting occurred on the evening of October 29, 1970, when construction worker Paul Phillips approached a man standing on the porch of an unfinished home in Kings Park West. According to Phillips, the man was wearing a grey, black and white bunny costume and was about 20 years old. He began chopping at a porch post with a long-handled axe, saying, "You are trespassing. If you come any closer, I'll chop off your head." Spooky. Rumors spread like wildfire, with the Washington Post even reporting on the legend, mentioning the multiple incidents including man in bunny costume saw in Fairfax October 22, 1970. The rabbit reappears October 31st, 1970. Bunnyman seen November 4th, 1970. Bunnyman reports are multiplying November 6, 1970. Not just that, but in 1973 a student at the University of Maryland College Park submitted a research paper that chronicled precisely 54 variations on the two incidents. Coming in at 3, Goat Man, also known as the Pope Licker. This is a legendary part man, part goat, and part sheep creature, reported to live beneath a railroad trestle bridge over Pope Lick Creek in the Fisherville area of Louisville, Kentucky. Now, numerous legends exist about the creature's origins and the methods it employs to claim its victims. According to some reports, the creature uses either hypnosis or voice mimicry to lure passers-by onto the trestle to meet their death before an oncoming train. Other stories, however, claim the monster jumps down from the trestle onto the roofs of cars passing beneath it. Other legends state it attacks its victims with blood-stained axe, and that the very sight of the creature is enough to drive people to leap off the high trestle themselves. The monster was the subject of a 1988 film by director Ron Schlichtner called The Legend of the Pope Lick Monster, with the majority of the movie being shot at the Pope Lick Trestle. Now, it has been confirmed that several people have died on or near the train trestle at Pope Creek in pursuit of the monster, and on April 23, 2016, a 26-year-old tourist from Ohio died after being hit by a train while searching for the creature. Coming in at number 2, Mothman. Hailing from West Virginia folklore, the Mothman is a creature reportedly seen in the Point Pleasant area from November 12, 1966 to December 15, 1967. On November 12th, 5 men who were digging a grave at a cemetery near Clendenin, West Virginia, claimed to have seen a man-like figure fly low from the trees over their heads. This is confirmed to be the first known sighting of what became known as the Mothman. Not long after, on November 15, 1966, 2 young couples from Point Pleasant told the police they saw a large grey creature whose eyes glowed red when their car headlights picked it up. They would go on to describe it as a large flying man with 10-foot wings, following their car while they were driving in an area outside of town known as TNT area, the site of a former World War II munitions plant. Following these sightings, more quickly began to occur, one that took place at the Silver Bridge, which would later go on to collapse, resulting in the death of 46 people, with the incident giving rise to the legend of the Mothman. Now, the Mothman was eventually introduced to a larger audience by Gray Barker in 1970 in his book The Mothman Prophecies, which would later be adapted into a movie in 2002 starring Richard Gere. Wasn't the best, but still worth a watch. Point Pleasant held its first annual Mothman Festival in 2002 when a 12-foot tall metallic statue of the creature was unveiled in 2003. Not too shabby. And finally, coming in at number 1, the skunk ape. Now, these cryptids could be lurking almost anywhere around the south, but they have a particular tendency to pop up around Florida. The skunk ape, also known as swamp cabbage man, swamp ape, stink ape, Florida Bigfoot, Louisiana Bigfoot, Myakka ape, swamp squatch, and Myakka skunk ape, is a humanoid creature said to inhabit Florida, as well as North Carolina and Arkansas, and is named for its appearance and for the unpleasant odor that is said to occupy it. Now, reports began back in the 60s and 70s, with one sighting in 74 describing a foul-smelling, hairy ape-like creature which ran upright on 2 legs around the suburban neighborhoods of Dade County. Skeptical investigator Joe Nickel has written in the past that some of the reports may represent sightings of the black bear, and it is likely that other sightings are mere hoaxes or misidentification of wildlife. Now, while the National Park Service has dismissed the existence of skunk apes as a myth, local residents remain adamant that their fragrant primates occasionally appear to terrorize their pets.
Number 5. The Loveland Frog. First up on our list is the Loveland Frog, a cryptid that was new to me but is very quickly winning my heart, and maybe he'll steal yours as well. The Loveland Frog Man is a mythic humanoid frog that is a legend to the people of Loveland, Ohio, which is where the name comes from. The Frog Man is described as a 4-foot bipedal frog, mostly appearing to hide around bodies of water. I mean, it's a frog. Where else is it gonna go? It was first sighted in 1955 by a businessman driving home alone at night. He was headed out towards Branch Hill in Ohio when he saw 3 strange, short, squat, bizarre-looking creatures standing on their hind legs alongside the road. He described them all as being 3 to 4 feet tall with leathery-looking skin and faces just like a frog with giant glowing yellow eyes. The Frogman would go quiet for a bit and wouldn't be seen again until 1972 when a local police officer was driving home and saw an unidentified 4-foot creature running in front of his car's headlights. When he got a good look at it, the officer described it as a leather-skinned bipedal animal crouching like a frog, and it hurriedly ran towards a river. 2 weeks after that sighting, another Loveland police officer reported seeing the same creature, the same little bipedal frog monster. This officer, however, shot at the Frogman and discovered that what he found was a tailless iguana that had grown unusually large. Now, while for some, that was the end of the Frogman legend. There are still sightings and reports to this day. As recent as 2016, people are still claiming that they see the Loveland Frogman. To the people of Loveland, the Frogman is something of a local hero. They love the guy, and I gotta be honest, I sincerely do too. There's something about this cryptid story that's really doing it for me. There's no stories about him eating anybody. The Loveland Frog monster's not attacking anybody. He's just a happy little frog guy scurrying across the roads. I sincerely hope they're out there. And hey, you having fun on the channel? Drop a subscribe for new scary videos every single day, twice a day. Let's keep on going. Number 4. The Fresno Nightcrawlers. Up next is the Fresno Nightcrawlers, and let me just say right now, these are probably my favorite cryptid on the entire list. If I say another one is, I'm lying. It's these guys. Some cryptids are downright terrifying. Some cryptids will keep you up all night, and maybe these guys will too, but I personally find them downright adorable. These are the Fresno Nightcrawlers. Bizarre, rail-thin bipedal creatures with no discernible features whatsoever. The only footage we have of them is blurry security camera footage, which doesn't help identify the creatures much at all. They appear short with very, very long legs, almost stilt-like. The first reported sighting of one of the Nightcrawlers came from a city in California, Fresno, where the name comes from. A man named Jose was at home late at night with his dog trying to get a good night's sleep, but was repeatedly disturbed by his dog barking at something out the window. He went over to quiet his dogs down and noticed something deeply bizarre on his security camera. He saw a pair of white, elongated creatures strolling down his lawn. The next morning he claims to have seen small footprints all over the lawn. The next sighting of the Nightwalkers was in Carmel, also in California. A former Marine and his wife were driving up a hill, and they claimed that they saw a 7-foot-tall creature that they described as a thin, pale, armless white humanoid walking on by. What are the Nightwalkers? They're weirding me out. Are they aliens? Cryptid? Possessed pair of pants? If anyone's got a line, you let us know immediately. Whatever the Nightwalkers are, all I know is that I love them. I think they are downright adorable. I watched a clip of them walking down the hill like 30 times while I was writing this script, so just know that. Number 3, Skinwalkers. Now let's shift to one that's not adorable even a little bit. Skinwalkers are an extremely popular cryptid, a person with the ability to shapeshift into any creature they desire. Sometimes the legends state that in order to shapeshift, they need to molt out of their skin, and in some legends, they have to wear the pelt of the animal they intend to shapeshift into. You know, sometimes skinwalkers are presented as monstrous, sometimes humanoid. The recurring lines through every skinwalker stories, though, is that they are absolutely terrifying, and under no circumstances should you ever look one in the eyes, as it's said that looking one in the eyes will not only draw its attention, but seal your fate. So take a listen to this story from Reddit. This post came to us from a Reddit thread asking, what was the scariest thing that has ever happened to you? And an anonymous Redditor shared this story, and it's probably one of the scariest things I've ever read. Beginning. I was a kid when this happened. My uncle and I were finishing up gathering firewood from my grandmother because it was getting dark. We were driving back on a dirt road, and I had this awful sense of being watched. Before I could turn to look out my window, my uncle shouted, "Don't." My heart felt like it was gonna beat out of my chest, and I heard a tap on the window. My uncle sped up and started praying in our native language. I didn't know what was going on, and I thought it was over until our truck dipped from the bed. My uncle then started saying, "Look at me and don't turn away," over and over. And then I heard it again, tapping from the window behind me. It was getting harder for me to breathe, and I wanted to cry. A minute or two passed, and the truck dipped. My uncle looked at me and said, "We'll ask your father to do a prayer in the morning so that the evil will forget our faces." Naturally, other people on Reddit were kind of terrified about that story since it's sending a chill down my spine, and they asked him what he thought it was, and the Redditor said simply that he thought it was possibly a skinwalker. What more is there to say? Number 2, the Flatwood Monster. The Flatwood Monster is another West Virginia native, and I've gotta ask, why are there so many cryptid stories coming out of West Virginia? I've never been there, so maybe somebody can clear this up, because all I know about West Virginia is anything John Denver sang about, and he didn't mention Mothman or the Flatwood Monster, but that's a whole different story. Anyway, the Flatwood Monster is a cryptid that's been thought to be an extraterrestrial in nature. It was reported to be 10 feet tall and roughly 4 feet wide. It's described as wearing some sort of mechanical suit like it's Darth Vader rather than a purely organical being, and its most notable feature is its giant bulbous head with 2 gigantic eyes glowing green. It's got a big cowl in the shape of a spade behind it that makes it look a bit like it's an alien vampire, and its body was thick, armored, and it has small, spindly little arms like a T-Rex. Now, the Flatwood Monster's first sighting dates all the way back to 1952, when 3 local boys saw a shining light falling across the sky, eventually hitting the ground nearby at a local farm. The boys returned home to report that they'd seen a UFO crash land and told one of their moms to get a search party going, and honestly, that is exactly what I would do if I ever saw an alien. I would probably still call my mom, to be honest, if I ever saw an alien. From there, they gathered a small search party to go to the farm to approach what they saw. When they reached the top of the hill, they saw a large pulsating ball of fire and smelled a mist that was making their eyes burn. Someone in the search party noticed 2 small lights and flashed his light quickly at them, revealing a creature standing 10 feet tall with glowing green eyes. The creature hissed at them, then glid upwards and head off into the night. What was the Flatwood Monster? Some skeptics have speculated that those eyes could have been that of a barn owl, and the face does kind of light up. The shadow was disguising it, so it would make sense. But that begs to ask, what was the mist? And what was the thing that fell from the sky? Was the Flatwood Monster an alien? And is it just me, or is the Flatwood Monster just the tiniest bit adorable as well? I know it's kind of terrifying, and its bug eyes are gonna haunt my dreams, but does anyone else think it looks a little huggable? It's shaped like a friend? Number 1. Mothman. Mothman is arguably one of the most famous cryptids of all time, and it's captured our hearts since he started flapping around in popularity. Mothman's first ever recorded sighting was in 1966 in West Virginia, when 5 men were in a cemetery prepping for a funeral when they saw something bizarre rustling around in the trees nearby, and lifting off was a massive brown-winged creature that disappeared into the night, far too large and unwieldy to be a bird. From there, the legend of the Mothman began to rise. It would get spotted frequently throughout West Virginia and the surrounding states, but its home is West Virginia. 3 days later, after the first sighting of the Mothman, on November 5th, 1966, another sighting occurred. Roger and Linda Scarberry were driving with their friends, another couple, Steve and Mary Millette, around midnight. While driving, the couples noticed that amidst the darkness there were glowing eyes that seemed to be hovering around them. They stalled the car a bit, unnerved about who these mysterious eyes could have belonged to, and through the darkness and the headlights of the car, they saw a creature that stood 7 feet tall with leathery wings folded against its back. The creature began to pursue them rapidly, matching the speed of the car at around 100 miles an hour. They tried to turn around to get a better look at the thing, but the creature screeched and flew upwards into the sky when it was hit by its headlights. Now, this would be far from the last sighting of the Mothman. Since these early sightings, Mothman has been reported hundreds of times across West Virginia. He's practically a pillar of the community. I think he's allowed to vote. Some say he's a benevolent figure who wants to help people and warn them of dangers around, whereas others say that he's a more mysterious, nefarious agent, flying around sending people to their doom. There's an allegation that Mothman was involved in the destruction of a bridge in 1967 that led to the death of 40 people. Some survivors claim that they saw the Mothman flying around overhead after the collapse. Whether he's real, a West Virginian legend, a friend or a foe, there's no denying that like a moth to a flame, we're drawn to the story of the Mothman.
Starting off this countdown, we have the Beast of Gévaudan. Between 1764 to 1767, people in Gévaudan, France were fearing for their lives. A terrifying beast was stalking the town and taking the lives of many of the residents. This beast was described as a large wolf or something like a large calf or horse. Calf as in cow, not. Imagine like a large like someone's leg. Sorry. It was covered in reddish gray fur and had a long tail like a panther. It also apparently had a black stripe on its back and talons on its feet. The first victims were a bunch of hunters. The remains of 16 hunters were found in the forest, their heads all decapitated, their limbs scattered about. It is said that in the end 100 individuals died at the hands of this beast. To make matters worse, it also had the tendency to rip out its victims' throats. One terrifying encounter happened to a girl named Jean Boulet on June 30th in 1764. She was tending to a flock of sheep when this creature attacked and killed her. That's not all though. Another woman was attending to her cattle when the beast attacked her as well. Thankfully, she was able to escape it. She described it as, I quote, like a wolf, yet not like a wolf. The last time it ever threatened the town was on October 8th, 1764. A group of hunters set out to capture and kill this beast. The beast had previously mauled a number of people on that day. Later on, the hunters found it and shot at it. They didn't kill it, but they did drive the beast out of their town. Did he flee to another town? Did he go into hiding? Who knows? In our 4th spot today we have the El Chupacabra. El Chupacabra is a very creepy creature with vampire type tendencies. They like to attack animals and then drain them completely of their blood. When they're done, they just leave the animal's carcass and run off, which is quite strange. Normal animals like to feast on the meat, but this creature is only interested in the blood. So this creature has been described in a variety of ways. Some say it's like a weird reptilian kangaroo, whereas others say it looks like a hairless canine with red glowing eyes. Nonetheless, it's creepy. So the first reported sighting of a chupacabra dates back to 1887 in Wexford County. 2 lumberjacks were in the forest when they saw a weird creature dart by them. They described the creature as having a man's body, but a dog's head. It didn't stop there though. In 1938, a man named Robert Fortney reported a terrifying encounter with this beast as well. He said that there were 5 of them that surrounded him and then attacked him. He said that one of the 5 walked on 2 legs. Another creepy encounter took place in 1961. A night watchman in Michigan was patrolling the grounds of a manufacturing plant when he saw something weird in the distance. At first, he thought it was a person. That was until he got closer and realized that this person had dog-like features. He took out his gun and shot at the beast, but it did nothing. The last sighting that I want to talk about is one that gives me the heebie-jeebies. This story takes place in 1995 in Puerto Rico. A number of farmers would wake up and find their goats, sheep, and cows dead with a weird bite mark on their neck. Their animals were completely drained of blood. So does this mean that the chupacabra is real? If not, what was sucking the blood out of those farm animals? Moving on to number 3, we have the demon cat. Now this is a cryptid that apparently stalks Washington DC. It all started back in the 1800s. According to a report in the newspaper, this weird cat appeared and scared a group of security guards. They all fired at the cat, but before the bullet could even hit the cat, it disappeared right in front of their eyes. Then in January of 1898, a watchman was patrolling around when he saw this demon cat come right towards him. The closer it got to him, the bigger it got. Some say it got as big as a tiger. Others say it got to the size of an elephant. The massive beast then snarled and let out a massive hiss. It leaped towards the watchman, but it disappeared right in front of his eyes before it attacked him. That same year, the cat made many more appearances. In fact, it's believed that the cat shows itself right before disaster strikes. It appeared before Lincoln was shot, before the stock market crashed in 1929, and right before JFK was killed. So before the next devastating thing happens, this beast might make a return. Moving on to number 2, we have the Mongolian deathworm. The Mongolian deathworm is a famous cryptid in China. It's said to lurk in the Gobi Desert and is described as being this giant red-type worm creature. In fact, its Japanese name literally translates to large intestine worm. To make matters worse, apparently it can spit poison at its victims from afar. It's believed that this acid-like venom is so strong that it can kill a camel or horse. Over the years, there have been a number of terrifying encounters with this massive worm. One story that gets shared around a lot involves a young boy who gets followed home by this worm. The next day, his dead body was found by his home. It's believed that he ended up touching the worm and died doing so. His family knew that the worm was behind his death, so they headed out on a trail in the sand looking for it to get revenge. But the family never returned home. Now that's more of a legend. Let's talk about a supposed real encounter with this slithery dude. The first apparent real sighting was during the 19th century. Someone was out in the desert when they saw this creature slithering around. They said it looked like a cow's intestine. He watched this creature for quite some time and actually saw it strike and kill another creature. A more recent sighting took place in 2013. People were out looking for it and actually found it and apparently even caught this creature on camera. But who even knows what happened to this footage? Because I want to see it for myself. I swear, I need my own myth busting show or something. And in our number 1 spot today, we got Spring-Heeled Jack. Dude, the legend of Spring-Heeled Jack is a pretty freaking creepy one. What makes it even creepier is the fact that a number of people encountered this weird half-man, half-beast creature. That's multiple witnesses, and they all had similar encounters, which makes me believe that this cryptid might be real. So back in Victorian England, people were worried about this weird man-type creature named Spring-Heeled Jack. According to a number of stories, Jack would visit homes in the middle of the night, ring the doorbell, and when someone would answer it, he would attack them. Now, he was given the name Spring-Heeled Jack as witnesses said he had the ability to jump great distances and heights, something no normal human can do. Victims say he looked like a man dressed in red shoes and armor. Others claim he would wear loose-fitting black clothes with a helmet, or that he had wings and horns and sharp fangs that formed a wicked smile. The first sighting of Spring-Heeled Jack was October of 1837. A woman named Mary Stevens was walking in her town when this creature jumped from a tall building down to the ground right in front of her. He then attacked her and tried to kiss her, but someone heard her screams and thankfully came to the rescue. They then both saw this creature leap away. And Mary wasn't the only victim terrorized by Jack. A girl named Lucy Scales was also attacked by it. Same with a woman named Jane Alsop. She was attacked and strangled by this creature, but she managed to free herself. Jane said this about Jack, and I quote, "He was wearing a kind of helmet and a tight-fitting white costume like an oilskin, and he vomited blue and white flames." Soon, more and more people were going to the police terrified by Spring-Heeled Jack. One person said they saw Jack jumping from rooftop to rooftop. They said he had glowing red eyes and big sharp claws. Due to the fact that so many people encountered Jack, I'm telling you, it might be real. Was he a human? Was he a cryptid? Was he a weird human creature thing? I don't even know, man.
Number 5, Mothman. We had to start with a classic. He was either going to be number 5 or number 1, and I figured we'd get him out of the way first. He's maybe one of the most universally recognized and classic cryptids out there. He's West Virginia's unofficial mascot, and he's as beloved as the Appalachians and buckwheat pancakes. You've probably heard of Mothman a bunch before, but do you know his backstory? You know where his legends and his legacies start? Unless you're a West Virginia native, maybe not, so let's shed some light on the Mothman, because he would probably love that. You know, he's a moth, he's drawn to it. Most Mothman fans agree that his first reported sighting was in the 1960s, 1966 to be exact. The story goes that a young couple, one Roger and Linda Scarberry, had been driving around at night when they saw a large creature whose eyes were glowing red, standing at the side of the road near the site of an old World War II munitions plant. Linda described as being 7 foot tall, muscular, with giant wings and nightmarish glowing red eyes. Upon being illuminated, the creature pursued them all the way to Point Pleasant. Now, one isolated sighting does not make a cryptid legend, so it was probably the repeated sightings that propelled our favorite moth into legend status. For the next few weeks, Virginians kept reporting sightings of a bizarre, large bird-like creature with glowing red eyes. On December 15th, 1967, the Silver Bridge in West Virginia collapsed, with several locals conspiring that the Mothman was involved and could be seen flying away from the crime scene. I always thought he was benevolent, just like a fun, I don't know, guy. I didn't know he did stuff like that. This is unwelcome news. Maybe it's just because we all like the idea of him so much. He does look weirdly cuddly, but Mothman is an absolutely beloved figure to West Virginia and cryptid fans all over. He's kind of larger than life, and it's easy to forget that the first initial sightings and reports of him was that he was a paranormal threat intent on harming humans, considering just how adorable he is now. He's got movies, stuffed toys, and even a festival in his hometown dedicated to celebrating our favorite freak. And if you're looking for more stories of freaks of nature, or the nature of freaks, stories too good to be true and stories too true to be good, well, we've got all of that and then some on Top 5 Scary. Click through, I guarantee you'll find something you like, and then subscribe and stay scared if you do. But hey, keep watching this video first, because we got way more cryptids to get through before we hit the credits. Let's keep going. Number 4, the Rougarou. Oh, that is so fun to say. Say that at home with me around. Rougarou. Oh, rolls off the tongue. Our next entry takes us deep into the swamps of Louisiana. Deep beneath the brush of the bayou, amidst all the flies, crawfish, toads, and gators, lies something sinister in the sunshiny Pelican State. Alright, I'll knock that off. I won't do that for the rest of the video. I won't torture you. The Rougarou is a centuries-old cryptid, a more Cajun answer to the werewolf. The name Rougarou actually is a direct link from the French word for werewolf, loup-garou, shifting over time. If you L to an R if you can hear it there, I don't know. My accent's not great. The history of the Rougarou can vary greatly, with differing legends and conflicting fables telling different stories of the beast's origins or motives, but it can all be traced all the way back to medieval France. Back in those days, a lot could go wrong. Lost crops, Your livestock goes missing, your children go missing, your house burns down, all your investments in cryptocurrency go up in smoke, and all your apes get stolen. Any number of terrible things could happen to a French medieval peasant. And when that would happen, instead of cursing out or lashing out at the sky, you would blame the Rougarou for your troubles. It's very easy to pin all your problems on an imaginary werewolf. I do that all the time. I stub my toe, I curse out a werewolf. Villages would capture people who they believed to be acting strangely, or even sometimes just somebody who lived out in the woods, and pin all the blame on the village's problems on them for being a werewolf. So unfair, the discrimination werewolves receive. This tradition of blaming an invisible werewolf for your problems led to the Rougarou becoming a fixture in legends passed down from French Catholics, mostly about behaving. Stories would be told of how if you didn't behave, you didn't follow your parents' rules, the Rougarou would come and he'd snatch you from your bed in the middle of the night and carry you off in the woods. Or sometimes he's like a very Catholic monster. If you didn't adhere to the rules of Lent every year, your sinful ways would see you transforming into a Rougarou. So it's a Catholic werewolf born out of naughty behavior instead of being bit by one. How exactly someone transforms into a Rougarou is not made super clear, like if it only happens on full moons or if it's a one and done kind of thing and then you're a furry for life. All that's known is that the Rougarou is a deadly creature of the night, stalking the swamps, giving pause to travelers who dare explore the bayou late at night. But hey, so long as you mind your P's and Q's and you promise to give up whatever you said you would for Lent, you and the Rougarou should be headed in different directions. Hopefully. Number 3, Skinwalkers. This one is a very popular cryptid online, and you've probably heard a great deal about them before if you're a fan of this kind of thing. But the term does kind of get thrown around a lot and ends up describing all sorts of things that might not be super accurate. So let's take a look at examining some of the history of the legend and where it stems from. Skinwalkers are apparently really viral on TikTok. I wouldn't know, I gotta be honest, I try to really limit how much time I'm on that. The Skinwalker is a creature of Navajo legend where it's referred to as a Yi Naldushi, and please forgive me if that's pronounced incorrectly. It translates to, by means of it, it goes on all fours, referring to their tendency to walk like an animal. Navajo witches and skinwalkers go against traditional Navajo values and are seen as the antithesis of their core beliefs. As well, it's worth adding, legends of skinwalkers and Navajo witches are not particularly well known or well told outside of indigenous communities, and some indigenous advocates and groups are not the biggest fan of their folklore and cultural history being made into fodder for ghost stories. Animals commonly associated with skinwalkers are coyotes, wolves, foxes, eagles, owls, or crows, but skinwalkers are said to be able to have the power to assume the form of any animal they see fit. Now, a variation of the legend surrounding the creature is that they're able to extend this ability to taking the face of a human victim, which is extremely scary. Some legends say that skinwalkers gain power from a victim's fear and that they prey on those who are afraid. And some state that looking into the eyes of one will cause your body to seize up, overtaken by the fear, where it will then attack you. On TikTok, as I've come to understand from some very intensive research, and definitely not just goofing off at my desk watching TikToks of cats falling down on my phone, is that skinwalkers are popularly thought to be a creature imitating humans or animals and doing a poor job of it. Which case, if that is true, the likelihood of me being a skinwalker? Sky high. Number 2, Mongolian Deathworm. Our next entry is a cryptid whose name really says it all. If you ever hear something get described as a Mongolian Deathworm, you have to figure that is probably not the friendliest form of life out there. For starters, it sounds like it would be way more at home in the dunes of Arrakis than it would be on our Earth. That one's for my Frank Herbert heads out there. The creature is also called Ogoi Korkoi, which translates to large intestine worm, which is, that's just lovely. Appetizing. It allegedly lives in the Gobi Desert, has been evading hunters since the 20s when it first rose to prominence. A paleontologist and author going by the name of Roy Chapman Andrew recounted a story he'd heard at a gathering with several Mongolian officials, where they all talked of the worm at great length. Now, no one among them could claim to have actually seen it, but everyone firmly believed in its existence. In this book, he describes the worm as being about 2 feet long, with no head or limbs to speak of, and has such poisonous skin that direct contact is enough to have you buying the farm. It's described as well as having a sprayable venom and an electric discharge. You should probably see a doctor for that. It burrows underground, only coming up to the surface to hunt and eat, presumably. In 1990, Czechoslovakian cryptozoologist, and wow, that's a mouthful, Ivan Macro led a team to try and find the creature in the Gobi Desert. This I love so much because Dune is my favorite book. They use the same technique that the Fremen of Arrakis used to try and find these worms that the Fremen used to deal with the sandworms, they used a rhythmic thumping made from a motor-driven thumper to try and summon the creature out of possible hiding spots. They never found the fabled worm, and that's because they weren't taking spice, so they couldn't see properly. So either it was just a dream, or the thing is very, very good at hiding. And I think with a little work, that could make a fun expression. Oh, it's as hard as trying to find a worm in a desert. We'll workshop it. Number 1, Gashadokuro. And our final entry is gonna come from Japan, and as a fabled mythological creature, and may I just say, is one of my favorite mythical monsters I've read about in a while. As soon as I was reading about this thing, I started texting my friends, I was so excited about it. This thing is a real life Dark Souls boss fight. Maybe I'm outing myself as way too much of a nerd here, but this thing is where the inspiration for High Lord Wolnir and Grave Lord Nito of Dark Souls fame came from. I couldn't resist throwing it out there, sorry guys. Formed from tens of thousands of bones of fallen soldiers, the Gashadokuro is a massive titan of a beast, a gigantic skyscraper-sized skeleton. Is that not the coolest thing you've ever heard? A giant which wanders around the countryside during the darkest hours of the night. Their teeth chatter and their bones rattle, which is why the translation for their name translates loosely to rattling skull. You'd have to imagine though, you would probably hear this thing chattering its teeth from a few hundred miles away. You'd hear it in the next town over. It's said that the Gashadokuro is born when mass amounts of soldiers die on the same battlefield. Their bodies rot in the fields, and they don't receive proper funerary rites. As such, their souls are filled with torment as their bodies lay face down in the muck, and that malice permeates their bones, causing them to twist and mend into unnatural ways, clumping together to eventually form the humongous skeletal monster of a boss fight, the Gashadokuro. Now, troublesome for humans, it's said that a Gashadokuro is too large and too powerful to be felled by ordinary weapons. Although, I have to wonder if that's still true. I feel like we put more gunpowder in things in 2023 than they did in the Sengoku period, and I'm pretty sure a bulldozer would make short work of a bunch of bones being held together with hatred. It's said that these creatures no longer show up because the amount of dead bodies in one place are not nearly as high as they once were in rural areas of Japan back then, with significantly less wars and plagues occurring, which is a sign of progress, right? You know, if there's so few piles of mass graves that they're no longer reanimating as Godzilla-sized skeleton demons, that's a real positive note for the human race, and I think something we can all smile about. Number 5, the Honey Island Swamp Monster. Now our first entry is going to take us down to Louisiana, deep in the bayou, where all manner of sinister creatures are said to call their home. And there's a number of cryptids that live deep in the swamps. We got the Rougarou, the Night Folk, and the Honey Island Swamp Monster, beasts that got my attention right now. The Honey Island Swamp Monster is kind of like a Cajun cousin to Bigfoot. He's described as a gigantic bipedal furry monster resembling a hybrid of ape and man. The creature's been sighted and described dozens of times over through the years, but its initial sightings take us all the way back to the 1960s. This first documented report of Old Honey, as he sometimes likes to be called, comes from an air traffic controller who in his spare time took up wildlife photography, and his favorite spot to snap pictures was in, yep, you guessed it, Honey Island up in eastern Louisiana. After his passing, when relatives were going through his belongings, they found a series of photos and reels of Super 8 film that were thought to contain this creature. Now he claimed that in his time photographing Honey Island Swamp, he had discovered trails of footprints of these giant feet that showed only 4 toes, and near these untraceable mystery prints were the bodies of boars who had been ravaged beyond recognition. Now normally I would just say that's probably just the Night Folk doing what Night Folk do best, but this definitely sounds like the work of a vicious cryptid. Now interestingly, there are some cryptozoologists out there who cast a little doubt on the Honey Island Swamp Monster. Not that they don't think he's real, mind you, but that they think he's a different cryptid called the Rougarou, which I mentioned all the way back 30 seconds ago if you remember that. Another Cajun cryptid that I love so much I couldn't resist sneaking it into this video like he didn't want to pay for a ticket. It's top 6 scary cryptids now. Can't stop me when I'm filming, I make the rules. The Rougarou is described to be similar to a werewolf. It's a giant wolf man who lives in the swamps, but he hunts those who disobey the rules of Lent, which is surprisingly a lot more pious than most werewolves are. Could both of these creatures be out there in the swamps having a little monster mash out there? And if you're looking for way more cryptid content, we have got loads of that on Top 5 Scary and then some. Cryptid's not your jam? We got conspiracies, UFO sightings, stories too good to be true, and stories too true to be good. Click through, stay screaming, stay subscribed, but stay watching this video because we worked hard on it, okay? Moving on.
Number 4. Ogopogo. One of the most common types of cryptid is the lake monster. There's of course Nessie, the Loch Ness monster, Champ, the lake monster from Lake Champlain, and Ishi, the Japanese lake monster. But for my pick, I'm going to be talking about the legendary creature who is said to reside in the depth of the Lake Okanagan in the Canadian province of British Columbia. It is known as the Ogopogo. This creature is closely tied with native myths, which told of a creature that they called Na'atik, which translated to the water god or water demon. They believed that the creature demanded a sacrifice in exchange for safe passage across the lake. Because of this, the First Nations of the area would sacrifice small animals before entering the water. Stories tell of a visiting chief who refused to offer up a sacrifice as he did not believe in the creature, and as a result, when he and his family tried to cross the lake in their canoe, the creature used his long tail to whip up the surface of the lake and suck the canoe and its occupants down to the bottom of the lake. Ogopogo is often described as being a serpent-like creature, about 50 feet in length, with smooth, dark skin, who moves through the water at incredible speeds by coiling its body in vertical undulations and propelling itself forward with its powerful tail. Every year, there are reports from people claiming to see Ogopogo traveling across the Okanagan, with the usual grainy footage and blurry photos being given as proof of the creature's existence. In the 1980s, a cash reward was offered by a local tourism agency if anyone could prove the beast was real. After harsh words from Greenpeace, they were forced to clarify that the proof must be videotaped, and that if found, the monster was not to be captured. The Ogopogo is officially listed as an endangered species and is therefore protected from hunters. In one of the creature's most famous sightings, he was seen by 50 tourists who watched the Ogopogo for 45 minutes from the shore of a local beach, with one tourist being able to capture 10 seconds of 8mm film featuring the monster. Skeptics say that the sightings of the creature are usually groups of otters that are mistaken for one long creature rather than the several animals swimming together in a row. But regardless of the origin of this cryptid, or whether he is real or not, the Ogopogo has become a beloved tourist draw for the area, with the city of Kelowna, BC even having a statue of the creature as both a nod to local legend and a place for tourists to take their photo with the mythical creature.
Number 3. El Chupacabra. Since the 1970s, livestock farmers have said its name with a careful whisper, hushed tones under their breath. Is this creature even real, or is it just another tall tale that's gotten out of hand? The Chupacabra is a cryptid notorious across Latin America and the southwestern United States. Its name literally translates to goat sucker, which is hilarious, in reference to its vampiric feeding habits. Now, depending on who is telling the stories and where, interestingly enough, the Chupacabra's appearance varies fairly wildly. In Spanish-speaking countries like Puerto Rico, the Chupacabra is depicted as very alien in appearance. It's very reptilian, has like little bug eyes, and has spines running down its arm and its back. Now, alternatively, and this is the depiction I suspect more of you probably know it as this is the more North American southwestern version of it, the classic Chupacabra, if you'd like, is depicting it as a feral, canid-like creature, looking like a mutant dog, usually with missing chunks of fur, angry snarls, looks something more like out of Resident Evil than it would be an alien. I think it's very funny that these are the two speeds of Chupacabra. You have alien or weird dog. There's a small section of the cryptozoology community who suspect that these two might actually be two entirely different cryptids altogether, and we're conflating them, complicating matters ever so slightly, but you know, that's an argument for the cryptid subreddit. A lot of politics there, that's all I'll say. The first origins of the critter can be traced back to the 70s in Puerto Rico, when a string of mysterious, extremely violent livestock deaths were all happening around the country with no explanation for what had happened. These animals, primarily goats and sheep, would be found drained bone dry of their bodily fluids. That's why it's called the goat sucker. There are some experts who believe it's possible that the Chupacabra could be sightings of a thought extinct species called the thylacine, and that's probably not how you pronounce that. I could have looked it up. Known more formally to his friends as the Tasmanian tiger, it's a weird little critter that doesn't quite look like a cat, doesn't quite look like a dog, and is kind of somewhere in the middle. Very cute, but it's thought to be extinct, with its last remains being officially found in 2022. There are some skeptics and experts out there who wonder if perhaps this real-life mythical beast could be what people have seen when they see the Chupacabra. So what do you think, my delightful little comment section? Is the fabled Chupacabra really out there terrorizing the lives of goats, or would you have to be a sucker to believe that? that.
Oh, because he sucks goats.
Yeah, that's what you gotta get down on the car ride home. Number 2, the Goat Man of Maryland. Maryland is a beautiful state that a lot of important people over the years have called home. Frederick Douglass, Harriet Tubman, Babe Ruth, and if you believe the folklore, the Maryland Goat Man. I've talked about the Maryland Goat Man a few times on this channel, and I'm very likely to talk about him a few more times because he's a cryptid who just can't be bleat. Like beat, because he's a goat.
Oh!
I'll see myself out. No, there's more of me. The Goat Man is a villain straight out of a direct-to-DVD horror movie. Said to resemble a satyr, this Chronicles of Narnia extra haunts the woods of Maryland, hatchet in hand, ready to attack anyone who dares disturb its territory. Like any good cryptid, there's some variations depending on who's telling the story of what he looks like. Sometimes he's more humanoid with a human face and a furry body, whereas sometimes it's outright monstrous with a goat's head and bipedal, looking like something out of a Greek myth. I greatly prefer the latter. The Goat Man has been a popular urban legend for a while now, with the earliest sightings and stories going all the way back to the 70s, when dogs around the area of Bowie, Maryland, were going missing at an alarming rate. Whispers came out about a malicious goat man who was stalking the woods, taking your pets as his prey, and these rumors caught on like wildfire, and the character became a very popular campfire story. You know, you'd see graffiti sprayed on the walls saying things like, Goat Man was here, or Goat Man is watching, remind you to behave. Now, Goat Man's possible backstories are far too good to include. It's half the reason I have such a fondness for this cryptid. Depending on what Marylander you're talking to, you might hear that the Goat Man is a complete mystery. Just a strange goat demon who's bad to the bone. Or, if you want a way more colorful backstory, like I know you do, then the Goat Man is the product of a mysterious mad scientist's experiment to, I don't know really, do something with goats? Very possible this could be a Jeff Goldblum fly situation, somebody merged with a goat. Anyway, he escapes from the lab and he wreaks havoc on humanity and is said to mostly haunt Lover's Lane and go after teenagers in parked cars. I way prefer the backstory where he's a lab experiment and he's like a furry Jason Voorhees going after people smooching. Goat Man, we absolutely love you. If you are watching, please feel free to reach out, DM Top 5 Scary. We would love to have you on the channel to do a collab. You can share your side of things.
Number 1, Man Bear Pig. This next creature has been described as the most super serial threat to our planet. You see, there is something out there which threatens our very existence and may be the end to the human race as we know it. I'm talking, of course, about Man Bear Pig. It is a creature which roams the earth alone. It is half man, half bear, and half pig. Some people say that Man Bear Pig isn't real. Well, I'm here to tell you now, Man Bear Pig is very real, and he most certainly exists. I'm Serial. Man Bear Pig doesn't care who you are or what you've done. Man Bear Pig simply wants to get you. I'm Super Serial. He is said to be a demon from hell that thrives on temptation and is known for making deals with societies, giving them nice cars and premium style ice cream, and then repaying the debt by unleashing unspeakable horrors and carnage upon the next generation. This deal was made by generations who knew the cost that the deal would have on their ancestors, but they were not expecting to live long enough to see the consequences of their actions. Man Bear Pig was recently responsible for a lethal series of attacks in Colorado, but despite the brutality in front of them, many locals still refused to believe that such a creature could exist. There is a rumor that a new deal was offered by the demon, where the town could stave off annihilation if they could give up soy sauce and Red Dead Redemption 2. Of course, the town refused such an unfair offer, cause plain rice, ugh. They instead renegotiated the deal with Man Bear Pig so that he would simply return in 5 years and unleash his fury 1,000-fold. How long do we have before Man Bear Pig returns? And is there anything we can do to stop him? If only we had taken Al Gore more serial.
In 5th place today, we're kicking things off with the Matagami Bigfoot. For those of y'all who are unaware with the area, it's located roughly 6.5 hours north of Toronto, and it's a sweet little community. I personally grew up about 3 hours away from it, so I'm feeling pretty qualified to talk about the area today and provide some additional geographical context where needed. This tale actually begins around 20 years ago when our anonymous narrator purchased property on the lake, which is a very common cottage and vacation spot. He had grown up spending summers in the area and describes himself as very knowledgeable about wildlife noises. Around 9:15 at night, right about when darkness was starting to take over, our narrator and his wife were sitting by the fire, facing the vast woods on their property, when his wife decided to go inside for the evening, probably to avoid mosquito bites. Those are brutal up there. He was staring at the fire alone when he heard what he described as 3 whacks about a kilometer away, and didn't really think about it until around 15 minutes later when he heard the sound again. but closer. Originally, he assumed it was the sound of a moose hitting their antlers against a tree, but it was too early in the year for that to be a thing. Being barely able to see the tree line through the darkness, our witness heard the noise again after another 15 minutes. But, you guessed it, closer. Not having anything to arm himself with and only a pen flashlight, he fled into the cottage as the whacks came again, and even closer this time. The whacks were never heard once he was inside the house that night, but happened often at night over the next decade. Now, I know, 2023. The most recent event was just last weekend, when our witness was hosting a get-together to open the cottage for the season. It may seem early, but some northerners are really eager for cottage season, especially since they get such cold up there. All of his neighbors were present when they heard a bone-chilling scream from less than 100 yards from where they were standing, causing everyone to pause in shock and wonder what they were hearing. Soon after, the same type of scream was heard deeper in the forest, almost as if it were answering the first scream. After scouring the internet and listening to a wide variety of animal sounds, nothing matched what our witness heard. His property is water access only, which means the chances of, a random stranger pulling a prank or drunk debauchery are ruled out from possible logical reasoning. My last 2 cents on this point as a former northern girl, I've heard some weird stuff in the woods when I'd be, camping at a provincial park with my family as a kid, but nothing like that. Kinda glad now that I never really went exploring on my own. In 4th place, we have the most recent sighting of Nessie. For the uninitiated, Nessie is the preferred nickname of the Loch Ness Monster, located in Loch Ness, Scotland. Yeah, it might have been obvious to some, but I like to make sure we all know what I'm talking about. Findings of our girl go all the way back to 565 AD, making her a grown woman at this point in time. Tied with Bigfoot for the most common cryptid being spotted, she's extremely popular, but quite the recluse at the same time. The most recent spotting is the first from this year, and I'm sure there will be plenty more to come. In early March, Nessie enthusiast Eoin O'Fedigan couldn't believe what he saw when he was monitoring a webcam video of the lake from his home. 2 separate clips captured something stirring in the mysterious depths close to shoreline lodges, near Fort Augustus on the loch's southern shore. He described that he almost couldn't believe what he was seeing, and it all happened so fast. In the first video clip, something moves on the surface for a couple of seconds, then you see 2 shadowy wakes moving in 2 lines under the surface, moving to the left around 15 feet before disappearing. Eoin estimated the wake was roughly 6 to 8 feet long, believing the water was too agitated for the disturbance to have been caused by a fish. Now, this is the first confirmed sighting of Nessie in over 7 months, breaking the drought of Nessie news. Maybe she was just hibernating? Can't say I blame her. Look at the weather some days. In 3rd place, time to talk about fairies. Now, while I like to think of them like helpful beings with multicolored hair and stunning wings, sadly the reality isn't all sugar plums and sweetness. American soldier Sam Barrett is a self-professed family man and comes from a long line of military personnel and is currently deployed on a peacekeeping mission. The location of his story has been changed for safety, so while I'm not quite sure where he's stationed for this, he describes the current climate as always raining or foggy. And at the time of this filming, yeah, ditto. One night this past February, while retrieving a cache of buried weapons, he and his platoon noticed some lights in the forest that were far away, but close enough to be seen with the naked eye. Sam described it as 10 small lights, all moving erratically. Another member of his group began to hear what sounded like 2 people whispering in a language none of the group could understand. It was very quiet at first, but then it started to gain in frequency until it sounded like they were whispering right next to his ear. Soon, 10 more voices joined in the whispering, but all speaking at the same time. The men began to panic, believing the lights to be a distraction, which was a common tactic used by local enemies, and that they would soon be ambushed. Caleb, a teammate and good friend of Sam's, suddenly started speaking very loudly. It seemed as though he was trying to communicate with his father, who had passed 2 years earlier, and dropped all of his belongings before running towards the lights. Sam assumed that his friend had lost it, or the enemy was playing with their minds. Fearing for Caleb, and worrying he might give up their position, Sam chased after him. Caleb just kept repeating, "I'm coming, father," as he sprinted towards the lights. And as they got closer, the lights got bigger, and Sam found it odd that he couldn't make out any definition in them. There was nobody or nothing behind them, nothing man-made or otherwise. They just looked like lights floating in midair. Caleb was now on his knees with his arms at his sides and directly in front of the lights. He seemed to be in some sort of a trance, and despite Sam's attempts to snap him out of it, he just kept talking to his father, and directly to the lights. Eventually, the commander of the team arrived, observing Caleb and then the lights before muttering, "The fairies have him." Oh. Okay, not ominous at all. Caleb eventually passed out and the lights disappeared almost instantly. After being carried back to their base and returning to consciousness, Caleb had zero recollection of what had happened, not only that evening, but the entire day was a blank. Okay, so maybe I don't want to meet a real fairy anymore. In second place, we have a spotting of not deer. Now, I have to say, I was definitely chuckling a bit at first reading about this cryptid friend, seeing as where I'm from, that's just another way to lead into conversation about seeing a moose on the highway. And while the thought of driving within eyesight of a moose is scary enough, not deer are actually scarier. This report comes from high school student Elias Merritt in Roanoke, Virginia. Describing the time of day as almost dark, he was waiting for his dad to pick him up after a basketball game when he experienced a feeling of something or someone watching him. He turned around suddenly and saw what he described as the shadow of a man behind a bush, which caused him to flee to the other side of the street, hiding in an area where he felt safer but could still see if his ride was arriving. As he stood in this new position, Elias saw 2 deer along the edge of the woods and watched them as they moved, observing that one of the deer seemed to have a bad back leg or was injured. He walked in their direction to get a better look and see if he could help, but as he got closer, he realized they weren't deer and froze, petrified. The beings had oddly shaped heads and appeared to have patches of hair stitched over human skin. Both of the creatures looked into the direction of Elias and slowly stood up on their back legs and began running towards him, chasing him to the point where he was simply running and yelling in the direction of his home, no longer worried about waiting for his ride. Eventually coming across his dad, he jumped in the vehicle and was so panicked that all he could utter was, "Go, go, 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 go," unable to speak normally. Thankfully, his dad didn't prod, and the boy was able to tell his tale to both of his parents once he calmed down at home. Later that evening, Elias's dad sat down with him and explained that several years ago, he had had a similar experience while hunting in the forests outside of town, with his descriptions of the creatures being almost identical to what Elias had seen. Now, not to sound like a broken record, but I'm really glad I've never been the hiking type. Coming in first place, we have the Beast of Bladenboro, over in North Carolina, in the town of, anyone want to guess? You got it. There was a series of animal deaths back in the winter of 1953 to 54 that were highly suspicious, with plenty of skeptics discussing possible predatory animals as the cause, but locals claim it was the fault of a unique predator that still roams the forest to this day and can be spotted anywhere between Bladen Lake State Forest to the Green Swamp Preserve area, which is around 3 counties and 1,225 square miles, making it a fairly sized hunting ground. This spotting in particular takes place in early March, when experienced hunter Zach Kennedy was in the Green Swamp Preserve area when it started getting dark, which is when you have to leave the area in accordance with local law. Making his way through the swamp and bush towards his truck, he heard a strange noise and paused to listen closer, believing it to be a black bear. When he stopped, the unknown being stopped, and when he walked, it also walked. Now, Zach said it made him nervous, no kidding, because whatever it was knew he was there and wouldn't be running off. He said he started making noise and even set off a warning with his personal firearm. Now, unlike an actual bear would, this creature didn't leave, but instead let out a growl. Zach said you could feel as much as hear. A hard pass. When he came out of the woods and onto the dirt road where his pickup was within sight, Zach made the decision to try and run to his truck since whatever it was still following him. Creature soon began running as well, with Zach comparing the sound to a bulldozer crashing through the woods, and when it was out of the woods, it sounded like a horse running through loose dirt. He could hear the stomps of its feet and the growling in its breath, and released another round behind himself, hoping it would scare the being enough to stop for a moment and give Zach a chance to make it to the truck. The creature screamed behind him, and Zach thought the scream came from a human, causing him to turn around and clearly see the creature for the first time. He described it as jet black, as big as a 600-pound black bear, with a tail as long as its body and eyes that were glowing red. Zach bolted the rest of the way to the truck and jumped in, and had barely locked the door before the beast was pressed up against the window, with its breathing fogging up the glass. The creature then moved to the front of the truck, and while standing on all 4 legs, was eye level with Zach in his pickup. It chased Zach as he drove as quickly as he could for quite some time, before eventually stopping and staring as Zach continued his escape. Now, the next day, he and his dad went back and looked around for tracks, red bodily fluids, any evidence at all. He said there was no red fluid to be seen, even though he knows it was, shot, and there were paw prints as big as his hands on the ground everywhere. They then found a tree that had claw marks around an inch deep in the wood and spaced 4 inches apart from each other around 9 feet up. Now, the men didn't venture into the woods, nor did they go too far from the truck, describing the feeling of being hunted and not wanting a repeat of the day before or worse. They got back in the truck to leave and heard a scream that made all of the hair on their body stand straight, deciding then and there to leave and take a hiatus from hunting for this season.
Number 5. Ghosts and the Men in Black. Our first story comes to us from the internet's front page and a very reputable trusted news source, Reddit. A thread was posted asking Redditors, those who've encountered a cryptid, what happened. Now, it's worth a click through, there's a lot of good stuff in there, but our first story comes to us from a user, Amazing Banana. He describes being at a park with his partner, stargazing and enjoying the night. The park was smack dab in the middle between a little suburb and on the other side, some dense foresty area. As the two were sitting and cherishing the moment, making precious memories, our storyteller heard something coming out of the woods that sounded like somebody stomping around. Concerned about something suspicious happening, he looked up to try and see what was going on. He described seeing something walking around, hunched over and walking on 4 legs, wearing what looked like a white cloth over it. Naturally, he was pretty confused, so he asked his partner to describe the same creature as she looked at it, saying it also looked like something draped in a cloth. Scared and confused, the pair took off to their car to take off and leave behind whatever they'd seen. From here on, the two of them went out to another park to collect their bearings and saw a strange black, unidentified flying object that looked like a helicopter, but the OP said it didn't look like any vehicle he had ever seen before, describing it looking more like one of the vehicles from Avatar or Halo Reach. He said it flew in a way unlike anything he had ever seen. So what exactly was this? Was this a UAP and an extraterrestrial that they encountered in the park? Or perhaps, and this is just speculation on my end, could that have been a cryptid they saw? And the vehicle he saw afterwards was some sort of special government vehicle sent in to collect the sample? Black helicopters and the Men in Black, that kind of deal. The creature described could be something called a kune-kune, a Japanese urban legend of a cryptid that manifests itself as a thin, white sheet like a floating ghost. Now, the OP never specified where the post was coming from, so who's to say? We may never know. If you like cryptid videos and you like UAP videos, I have got boxes of cryptid and UAP videos. Just check them out on the channel, and hey, toss a subscribe if you're feeling generous. Number 4, the Enfield Horror. Enfield, Illinois was supposed to be just another calm, regular old Midwestern town. Sadly, for the residents, it would be plagued by cryptid sightings, its most famous being the one named after the town, the Enfield Horror. The Enfield Horror was described as a short, squat beast with 3 legs, 2 small arms, and bright eyes like flashlights, standing a bit under 5 feet tall. It has leathery, wretched skin and is not the kind of thing you ever want to see. The first spotting of the creature was in 1973 by one Henry McDaniel, a local Enfield resident. One night at around 9:30, McDaniel and his wife returned home to their children, telling them they'd seen something scratching on the door. Later in the evening, McDaniel heard something scratching at the door as well. He went out to see what it was, expecting to see just a neighborhood dog, but instead was greeted by the entity now known colloquially as the Enfield Horror. McDaniel fired at the monster and claims he did hit it, but the beast shrugged it off and hissed back at him, and then bounded away in long leaps across the yard. He reported it to the police, who came to investigate, and they didn't help too much, but what they found was concerning. 6-toed footprints and patterns in a 3-footprint pattern. And later that day, there was another report of someone else being jumped by a creature that seemed remarkably similar to the creature described by McDaniel. And this is far from the only 2 sightings of the Enfield Horror. After this initial encounter, sightings popped up pretty frequently around Enfield. No one ever found the Enfield Horror, and whatever it was has never been confirmed. So it could still be out there. Number 3, Wolfman. Of all the monsters out there, especially like the Universal monsters, my all-time favorite are probably werewolves. I don't really know why, just absolutely loved them. I used to draw them in my homework as a kid all the time. I really wanted to be a werewolf. I was bizarrely obsessed with them, so I'm a sucker for anything about them. Take a listen to this story here. A reporter on BuzzFeed asked the BuzzFeed community if anybody had any interactions with cryptids, and this story shared had me howling. That's a little wolf pun for you. Okay, sorry, let's get into it. One night when there was a blood moon, I decided to try and get some good pictures and went to a secluded spot just outside of town. Pulling in, I noticed a tree had fallen by a nearby creek, right about where you'd park your car to fish. I started setting up my scope and camera, and I heard a lot of rustling around the brush. Coyotes are common enough, and I had my pistol on my hip, so I didn't pay it much mind. The rustling soon became more akin to something violently chasing through the woods. At this point, I stopped what I was doing and shined a light to try and see what it was, but I couldn't see anything. I was off-put by the sounds, so I started to pack in my stuff to leave when I heard some splashing. I turned on my light and I drew my gun, flashing it, and then I saw it. This 6-foot-tall thing with what looked like the face of a wolf, but was too big to be a wolf or a coyote. It was as tall as I was. As the light hit it, it growled and charged at me. It barreled forward and disappeared into the cornfield. I left all of my stuff behind, and I came back the next day to find a farmer and some sheriffs. The farmer's sheep had been eaten the night before, so he'd been setting up trail cams and came across all of my things. I told them about what I saw, and they told me it was just a bear. But the tracks were definitely not a bear. Could that have been just a bear, and in a flash of fear and panic, he mistook it for a cryptid? Or could this have been a werewolf sighting? And he should have brought some silver bullets. Number 2, a Ningen. A Ningen is a cryptid I'd never heard of before, but after reading about it, I was instantly fascinated by it. It's described as a humongous, blubbery, whale-like creature, but there's a lot of variations on the creature depending on who's telling the story. Sometimes it's depicted as being kinda cute, to be honest. It looks a bit like a seal, beluga, or a dolphin. And sometimes it takes on a more humanoid, terrifying shape, kinda like a merman sort of deal. Interestingly, Ningen is a Japanese word for human, implying that it should be more humanoid in description. It's described as being anywhere from 20 to 30 meters long, oof. And sometimes it's described as having a mermaid-like tail. Other times, having hands and hind legs. Basically, one of the few recurrences across all the legends is that it's got ghastly pale, white, blubbery skin, and is described as having a very blank face, with black eyes being one of the only notable features. They're first described around the 20th century, with most sightings of them occurring around the 2010s. There was a possible sighting in 2006 when people said that they found evidence of a Ningen swimming under ice on Google Earth, but from satellite photos, it can be a bit difficult to ascertain if that's actually what's going on. Still, reports and stories of this thing keep popping up, so it could still be out there. And finally, at our number 1 spot, Chupacabra. The Chupacabra is one of the most famous cryptids out there. Its name translates to goat sucker, and depending on the tale, the Chupacabra comes in many forms. Most often, it's described as being a quadrupedal, canid-like monster. But some depictions also describe it as being bipedal and more humanoid in appearance, and some of the really out there descriptions make it out to be like a little alien goblin looking thing. Over the years, there have been several reports of people who claim to have seen the Chupacabra, and even people who claim that they've felled the legendary beast. Most of these sightings, though, get attributed to coyotes with mange, which give off a sickly appearance and definitely do look demonic. Time and time again, the Chupacabra is debunked as just an urban legend or a misunderstanding, but goats keep going missing, goats keep getting found with all their blood drained, so what's going on? It's spotted all throughout Mexico, Puerto Rico, and the southwestern United States, always propping up around livestock being drained of blood. So are there really a species of souped up super predator dogs out there? Recently, and maybe you've seen this weird photo going around, a strange bipedal furry-like creature caught international attention online when it was picked up by a trail cam just outside of a Texan zoo. Now there are some who claim that it could just be someone wearing a costume, but it looks a little too spindly for that. As well, skeptics raise that it could just be a coyote standing on its hind legs, which would make sense, but it does look a bit alien. It doesn't really have the stature of a coyote. I'm gonna be honest, if it looks like anything, it looks the most like it's Crash Bandicoot than it does a person in a costume or a coyote. So could this be the elusive Chupacabra? It's occasionally described as bipedal, and maybe it would explain why it's so elusive if it's able to sneak around like this. I just hope we get some answers on this thing. Number 5, Bigfoot. It feels a little strange trying to say anything about Bigfoot because, you know, he's like the most easily recognizable and cited cryptid in North America and maybe all over the world. I find it very interesting how many cultures across the globe have a variation on a giant bipedal ape-like creature. You know, there's the Yeti of the Himalayas, the Australians have the Yowie, and I'm pretty sure about a dozen others. It's a very ancient cryptid, with its origins being difficult to trace back. It's one of our oldest stories as a people, actually. Some of the earliest stories ever come from indigenous tribes telling these stories of giant, hairy, bipedal creatures that would live in the forest. If you've ever wondered where the name Sasquatch comes from, it's an anglicization of Sasquatch, a shape-shifting creature originating from the Thitsales people of Vancouver, described as being a giant ape-like creature that could take the shape of different creatures. Which I guess would kind of explain how the thing is so good at hiding if it's always turning into something else when we're trying to get footage of it. Now, the term Bigfoot came about sometime in the 1950s. Jerry Crew was a lumberjack working in Humboldt County when he discovered a set of large 16-inch footprints footprints sunk deep within the mud of the Six Rivers forest where he was working at the time. He told his coworkers about this odd occurrence, with many of them claiming that they'd seen similar tracks on previous sites, reporting too of various things they couldn't explain, like a 450-pound oil drum going missing in the middle of the night. You know how often that happens, you look one way and then your 450-pound drum is gone. The men gave a name to this mystery creature that they perceived was harassing them and called it Bigfoot on, well, account of the big feet. Sometimes the origin is exactly what you think it's going to be. From here, once a local paper picked it up, the story of Bigfoot spread across the country, referencing this mystery creature leaving tracks in California. It was this, combined with the famous footage in 1972, that cemented Bigfoot as a cryptid with staying power. Now, I'm referring to the Patterson-Gimlin film, named after the filmmakers. You've definitely seen it if you're interested in cryptids at all. It's less than 50 seconds, and it's some of the most famous cryptid footage of all time. It's a very short clip. Everyone recognizes that, like, classic Bigfoot walk. To date, it's never been officially debunked, and the men who recorded the capture went to their graves insisting there was no hoax present. Now, the existence of Bigfoot is still hotly debated, and honestly probably will be forever unless we ever get some concrete proof, unless Bigfoot ever comes out and holds a press conference. Wherever he is or wherever they are, I hope Sasquatches, Yetis, Yowies, Big Feet, I hope they're chilling. Probably annoying dealing with paparazzi all the time, and you know what? Let them live in peace. If they want to come to us, they'll come to us. And while you're waiting for that Bigfoot press conference to happen, if you're looking for more cryptid content, Top 5 Scary's the place to be. We've got all of that and then some. If cryptids aren't your jam, we got aliens, conspiracies, true crime, fake crime, basically anything scary under the sun and above it. So stay subscribed, don't miss a single scream, but do that after this video, okay? Wait till the credits. Alright, moving on. Number 4, Thunderbird. Our next critter is going to be the Thunderbird. Nope, nothing to do with the sick classic car, although it's a mean ride. The Thunderbird is a creature that appears across many cultures, mostly indigenous groups alongside the Pacific Coast and Great Lakes area, all telling similar stories of these enormous, larger-than-life birds of prey. Now, these vary anywhere from stories of, just like a really big bird that would be scary, or sometimes Thunderbirds are more mythical, capable of impressive powers like thunder striking when they flap their wings, which is why they're called Thunderbird. Thunderbird, Bigfoot, sometimes the name of a cryptid really informs what they do. Tribes would tell stories about Thunderbirds to explain natural occurrences like storms or changes in weather or drought, famine, all those things. It's much easier to blame your problems on a big bird than anything else. Now, although they were thought to be dangerous, Thunderbirds were also seen as a benevolent nature spirit, and they would assist the tribe sometimes in searching of food during periods of famine. So they're not all bad, it's a Thunderbird to Thunderbird case basis. Now, it wouldn't be a good cryptid list unless we had a few sightings instead of just stories. So, we're going to talk about one incident in particular with the Thunderbird, the 1977 Lawndale incident. This occurred when a young boy, one Marlon Lowe, was playing outside when he was attacked by 2 large birds, one of which allegedly began to carry the boy away, until the boy's mother ran to his rescue. Eyewitnesses who'd seen the incident taking place claimed the birds were 4.5 feet long with a wingspan of 10 feet, which is pretty incredible. A 6-inch hooked bill, 3 sharp claws, and a large black body, not really resembling any local birds. So what was it? Thunderbird coming down to soup up prey? Real life Pokemon? Sounds a bit like a starling. Also, a big shout out to that kid's mom. Imagine that power dynamic. Anytime he's acting up, you can remind him of the time you saved him from getting eaten by a giant bird. Oh, that'll get him mowing the lawn for sure. Number 3, Korakamwi. One of my favorite genres of cryptid or mythical creature is just a regular animal, but big. I mean, that's what the Thunderbird was. Maybe that's evident because the last 2 creatures that I spoke of on this list was a big ape and a big bird, respectively. Can we keep that trend going? Of course. Now, this list has been a little North American centric so far, so our next entry is going to be the Korakamwi, a Japanese cryptid that is basically just a giant octopus. They don't all have to have powers, they don't all have to be complicated, sometimes you can summarize them just like that. It's sort of like the Japanese equivalent to the Kraken, the other really big name in the giant octopi scene. The Korakamwi is a giant octopus god that is said to reside in Hokkaido's Uchira Bay. It's said to be big enough to swallow a ship whole. Its crimson body turns the sky and water red when it swims through. Old fishermen used to tell stories that when the seas or skies would turn red, that meant the Korakamwi was there and you should just avoid avoid that general area, the fishing's gonna be no good. You're gonna get eaten by a giant octopus. Now, the origin of this legend is the best part of this cryptid. He's got some great lore. The legends state that near the mountains near the village of Rebungi, there lived a gigantic spider by the name of Yaushikep. His gigantic red body stretched over the mountains. One day, he descended, he was feeling frisky, and attacked the people in the village of Rebungi. He shook the earth as he walked, destroying everything in his path. Now, the villagers were terrified of him because he's a giant spider, and prayed to their gods to save him. The god of the sea, Repun Kami, heard the prayers and pulled the giant spider into the sea, where its body was contorted and twisted into the shape of the Akora Kamwe, the monstrous octopus. Started as a spider, ended as an octopus. That's an icky way to live. That guy's just always been icky. Number 2, Bunyip. Coming in at the number 2 spot for today is going to be the Bunyip, which from the name alone, you might be forgiven for thinking it sounds kind of cute. You know, you close your eyes, Bunyip. That almost sounds like it's wanting to be an adorable little rabbit Pokemon or something. If only. Also, there's a lot of Pokemon references in this video. I got it on the brain, clearly. Gotta catch them all. I think I'm just sad because Ash and Pikachu retired. Anyway, the Bunyip is a creature from Aboriginal Australian folklore. Its name literally means devil or evil spirit, translated from the Wemba Wemba language. The Bunyip is an aquatic predator with many varying descriptions. Sometimes it's described as kind of looking like a hippo, sometimes it looks like a cross between like a cat dog, and sometimes it's just an incomprehensible, scary, snake-like, twisty monster thing. All that's common across all of these depictions is that it's a scary thing that lives in the water. Over the years, there have been a number of reported sightings or findings of mysterious bones in southern Australia that led early settlers and colonists to believe that the Bunyip was a new creature out waiting to be discovered. It inhabits swamps, rivers, and lakes, lurking for prey. Now, the first recorded sighting of it by Australian settlers can be traced back to 1851, when a tracing of the creature's body was discovered near a riverbank in Ararat, Victoria. Local hunters had speared an unknown beast and made an imprint of the creature's body to remember it by, because, you know, if you found something weird, you'd want to remember it. They described it as 11 paces long and 4 paces wide in an extreme depth. Now, sadly, this outline no longer exists. They didn't use permanent marker, but it was enough to spur an interest and a hunt for this possibly mythical, possibly real creature. The Bunyip seems like it could have been a real strange step in aquatic evolution. Could not even begin to guess what it was really, or whatever it was they had found that day, so probably just safe for us to assume that it was a cryptid and there could be more Bunyip out there lurking and waiting. And number 1, Ogopogo. Coming in at the number 1 spot is going to be a local favorite of ours, Canada's very own Ogopogo. Yes, I'm a little biased. I had to include a local cryptid at the end of this one. Much like Bigfoot, almost every culture's folklore includes some variant of a sea monster. The most famous among them is probably the Loch Ness Monster, the fabled plesiosaur that lives deep beneath Loch Ness in Scotland. Ogopogo is kind of like the Canadian version of that. Ogopogo chills up in Kelowna, British Columbia, and is tied deeply to the native folklore surrounding this area. The Okanagan natives revered a creature they called the Nataika, or Nahatik, which translates to a few things, but all come out meaning roughly the same thing, you know? Water demon, water god, sacred creature of the water. If you're not getting this across, important thing that's wet. Nataka was a demanding lake god, and it was thought that in order to ensure safe passage, locals would have to sacrifice a small animal, a pig, a chicken, and others, into the lake to appease the hungry lake monster. The threat of a lake monster dragging victims to the bottom really kept people in line. Now, it should be worth noting that there is some good evidence and a bit of pushback from native groups to suggest that the demonic view of the lake spirit actually came from European settlers, and that to the Okanagan people, the Nahatiko was a fairly benign spirit that actually protected the valley and was kind of a cool guy. Now, all those names, where does it eventually become Ogopogo? The rather silly sounding name sounds more like it's a toy. Well, a children's song from the 1930s was the first place to ever refer to this sea creature as Ogopogo, describing it in the lyrics as, his mother was an earwig, father was a whale, a little bit of head, hardly in a tail, and Ogopogo was his name. That's as much singing as you're ever getting out of me. Over the years, much like Nessie, there have been numerous possible sightings of Ogopogo, seeing something strange in the water that can't always be easily explained. Many people believe that Ogopogo could be like an otter or a seal or something that's always getting misattributed, but the legend is very much alive. Ogopogo has become a bit of a mascot for the city of Kelowna, with the statue of it serving as a popular photo op for tourists. So please, if you're ever in the area, snap a pic with Ogopogo. He loves it, he loves the press, and you don't even have to sacrifice a chicken to him anymore. Number 5, the Dover Demon. Starting off on our list is the cutest cryptid on this list in my opinion, but still a creepy little freak. I like to start with the cute ones to kind of ease you into it. The Dover Demon first appeared in Massachusetts in the town of Dover, lending it its name. It appears as a spindly little demon kind of looking thing that sort of resembles a little gray, the traditional big-eyed aliens that you see everywhere. The Dover Demon is identified by its blank face, its red glowing eyes, and its hunched quadruped stature. The Dover Demon was first recorded in the late 1970s, discovered by 3 teenagers who were driving through Mass when they saw something bizarre being lit up by their headlights. Initially, they didn't think too much of it until they noticed that the creature in front of them looked more like a human than it did an animal. The driver, one Bill Bartlett, described the creature as resembling a baby with elongated arms, tan, sandpaper-like skin, which was coarse looking, and no nose, ears, or mouth to speak of on its bulbous, enlarged head. Bartlett claims that he only got a good look at it for a few seconds before it vanished off into the night. Now, there are some who speculate that the Dover Demon is capable of rendering itself invisible or camouflaging itself because of the description of this story, and that during daylight it prefers to hide itself in the trees of Dover. Now, bizarrely, I think some skeptics write off the Dover Demon by claiming it was just a baby moose being seen at an odd angle or under strange conditions. And I don't know if I really buy that. I've never seen a baby moose at night in headlights, but I have seen a baby moose. They would have a bulbous head or front-facing eyes, and a baby moose doesn't have that, so I don't know if it's all that. A more pressing question, I think, is if the Dover Demon is a cryptid or perhaps a visitor from another planet, because it does look a lot like the descriptions of the little grays. Now there's a bigger philosophical question there. Are aliens cryptid? Let me know about that in the comments below. And if you like hearing stories about cryptids and aliens, well, I have some great news, my friend. We got loads of cryptid videos on the channel, so get comfy, click through the playlists, and stay subscribed for something new every day. Number 4, Goatman. Up next on our list of cryptids that'll keep you from sleeping is Maryland's own Goatman. Now, he might look like Mr. Tumnus, but he isn't going to take you to Narnia anytime soon, and there'll be no Turkish delight in your future. Appearing as a half-human, satiric hybrid, the Goatman is thought to roam around Maryland, but he's been sighted in Louisiana and Texas as well. You know, perhaps he gets bored, perhaps he was taking a tour. The Goatman is said to carry a hatchet with him, and not for hacking any lumber. He's been said to be responsible for missing animals around the wooded areas in Maryland. Now there's a pretty good historical precedent for goats involved in mythology, with satyrs as a mythical historical cryptid, and goats have been associated with Satan and demons for generations. But the Goatman himself has got a pretty rich history in Maryland folklore. Depending on who you ask, he's either just a cryptid goat man who wanders the woods, or if that's not satisfying enough for you, one particularly colorful origin for the goat man is that it's the product of a mad scientist's experiment who was experimenting with goats, and when it went astray, the goat man broke loose and started attacking passersby with an axe. I really like this one, and I choose to believe it's 100% factual. The goat man is a pretty popular folk story with teenagers, with urban legends describing the beast hunting down those who are looking to spend a little quality time at Lover's Lane. It's said he'll come and bleat ya. Bleat, like beat. It's a goat pun. It was pretty bad. Do goats do that, or is this sheep? I'm not sure. You know what? I shouldn't be practicing here. We're gonna move on from this. The Goatman still hasn't been seen as much in recent years, and I sincerely hope that he's still out there. Number 3, Qualpalic. The Qualpalic, or the Qualipiluit, is an indigenous cryptid, with most stories emanating from Nunavut, Canada, and Alaska in the United States. The Qualpalic is described as appearing vaguely humanoid, but having scaly and bumpy skin, and long, stringy, disgusting black hair. They are described as being disgustingly ugly and that they reek of sulfur, and I think it's worth noting that you cannot find a single artist's depiction of these things that don't make them just look like vomitatiously gross. Interestingly, the creature is predominantly described as being a female monster, although some local variations of the stories exist where it is described as a male creature, but most tales revolving it describe it as a lady monster. The Qualpalic is a bit of an icy boogeyman, snatching up children who misbehave, waiting around thin ice to crack up and drag those children down into freezing cold water. It's thought that the origin of this creature was first told as a story for practical purposes, as a pretty good way to get kids to not walk on thin ice is to tell them that they'll be grabbed by a gross ice demon. Allegedly, when they grab a child, they stuff them inside their leather burlap sacks, then scurry back downwards into the water. It's said that you can hear a knocking under the ice as a last warning that they're about to strike. Now maybe this is just a personal experience I had, and maybe some of you also had this as a little kid, but I was read a children's book called A Promise is a Promise, a Robert Mudge classic, that featured a Quallapalloch as a villain that was trying to get a little girl to bring her younger siblings to the Quallapalloch as a little snack, and it terrified me so much. I didn't even live anywhere near thin ice and I was scared about it. Scared me bad. Wiry black hair and sunken little eyes got me. Maybe it's not relatable at all, but I thought I would share that. I definitely didn't spend any time near thin ice afterwards. Number 2, the Jersey Devil. The Jersey Devil is a fairly popular cryptid and has been subject to all sorts of sightings and stories since the early 1700s. And I bet you can't guess where it usually shows up. That's right. California. Nope, New Jersey. The Jersey Devil is commonly described as manifesting itself as a chimeric creature with a horse's head, bat wings, a snake-like tail, and hooves. There's an interesting folktale that says that the Jersey Devil was brought into our world when a woman was stressed out over her 13th pregnancy. Good lord, yeah, I would be too at my 13th pregnancy. Okay. She was nervous because apparently this pregnancy felt different, and I guess if she had 12 others, she'd really know. She said that she felt like the baby that was inside her was the devil. When she was ready to deliver her little newborn, instead of a happy little baby, the Jersey Devil was born, flew out into the night, and then spent the next 250 years terrorizing the New Jersey swampland. The creature is deeply rooted in local folklore, and to be honest, it's kind of beloved around Jersey. It serves as the name for the New Jersey Devils, and it worms its way into all sorts of pop culture, games, movies, TV, music. They love them over there. For years, there have been stories and sightings around New Jersey describing a kangaroo-like creature with glowing red eyes hunting on small animals in the surrounding areas, and lots of blurry photos of bizarre hybrid-looking creatures running around the countryside. There have even been hunts and bounties posted for the Jersey Devil with rewards for its capture. So is the Jersey Devil real or just a beloved local legend? Number 1, the Hat Man. Rounding off our list is our most recent cryptid on this list, and a piece of modern folklore that is already making a lasting legacy. The Hat Man is a shadow person, or at least thought to be. Everyone who's seen the Hat Man has described almost the same thing exactly, most concerningly. A spindly, shadowy figure that appears to be wearing a hat. Sometimes a fedora, sometimes a top hat, but everyone describes him as wearing an old, out-of-date style, so you're not going to see him in a shadowy snapback anytime soon. He always appears fairly towering, and you can't see his face. It's obscured, or just not present, and the only thing you're truly able to make out are his pinprick red eyes poking out of the shadows watching you. Depending on who you ask based on the sightings, the Hat Man can be considered somewhat benign. Maybe. It's usually reported that the Hat Man appears to people who are suffering from sleep paralysis or insomnia, and most claims of Hat Man describe him as just watching, observing, studying, or whatever. I honestly don't know if that's better than it attacking you. However, it's not all just stories of nighttime stalking. There are some who claim that when they've been visited by the Hat Man, that he's jumped them or choked them, or they've felt burning sensations on their scalps or their chest. Although some say he's just watching you for I don't want to know why. There are many who believe that he feeds off your negative emotions, and perhaps this is how he satiates himself. It's said that people who are visited by Hat Man are those who are already struggling with something emotionally resonating. Sometimes people in the same family even report seeing the Hat Man in similar occurrences, so does he target specific groups of people? Or is it just certain emotions he hungers for? The Hat Man is shrouded in mystery, and even just thinking about him is enough to make my hair stand on end and start eyeing the coat rack in my room just a little suspiciously when I turn the lights off. Number 5, Snow Wasset. Coming up first on our list of icy cold little critters is the Snow Wasset, a fearsome, legless little cryptid and a local one to boot, so I had to include it. Anything that comes from the greater Canada area is a big deal for me. It winters by the Great Lakes and the Hudson Bay, and in the rest of the year crawls up to Newfoundland and Labrador. Totally the wrong time of year, buddy. You gotta go to Newfoundland in the winter for Jake's dinner. Anyway, a Snow Wasset is like a weasel. It's a long, furry creature, except it has no legs. Except in the summertime, where it does have legs and also turns green. If I was a biologist, I would love to get my hands on this thing and figure that out. That particular part of the lore of this creature is really fascinating to me. Why would a creature shed its legs like baby teeth? What cruel joke of evolution is that? It's like a mammal sandworm. Anyway, I gotta move on. When it's in its legless, winterized form, it burrows deep beneath the snow and ambushes its prey by surprise and drags them into the frozen underground. Absolutely horrifying. A frozen, legless sightless, furry little snake is not pleasant by any definition. A wasset is said to be 4 times as large as a wolverine and 40 times as hungry, requiring a vast amount of meat to keep it sustained. Doesn't shed enough calories shedding those legs. I'm sorry, I don't know why I'm so hung up on this, my ghouls, but I am. Maybe it's because there's not actually that much information about the snow wasset out there. Sightings and stories about it date back mostly hundreds of years, and there haven't been too much buzz about them ever since. Perhaps they're extinct. Or perhaps they've all just burrowed under too deep where I can't see them. Either way, the only thing that really stood out for me is they turn green and have no legs, so I'm gonna keep banging on that. And hey, when it's this cold outside, what do you really need to go out for? Stay inside, order some food, turn the heat up, and keep watching Top 5 Scary for the rest of the night. And while you're there, maybe think about tossing a subscribe your way if it's not too much trouble. Number 4, the Nuckelavee. Coming up next on this list is the Nuckelavee, a cryptid that I had never heard of before researching for this video, so I hope it's new to you too and you get to learn something cool. The Nuckelavee is an old Nordic myth, a demon of the sea appearing as a horrifying demonic, part horse, part man, part thing hybrid. Seriously, this thing is disgusting. It looks like somebody glued a bunch of leftover horse parts and man parts together, and it's completely skinless, leaving its exposed flesh to all the elements to see. Kinda looks like one of those behind the scenes video of how they make McDonald's chicken nuggets, you know? The Nuckelavee is said to be trapped in the sea during the warmer months of the year, and then come winter is set free to wreak all kinds of havoc. This thing is pure evil, destroys just by breathing. The horsey head part emits toxic fumes just by opening its wretched maw, and this vapor causes crops to wilt, people to fall ill, and drought soon follows after. I see why they keep this thing locked up for most of the year, because it kinda sounds like a royal nuisance. It's thought that the Nuckelavee was first created by old Nordic storytellers as a way of rationalizing and explaining away things like drought and plague destroying the harvest. It's much easier to put a face to your problems, and when that problem is a wretched flayed horseman, it's easy to get angry at that. When stories of the Nuckelavee were told, it was thought to be so evil that its name was always said in a hushed whisper for fears of speaking too loudly of it could attract its attention. Oh, I wish I knew that about 2 minutes ago. I just said its name like 16 times very loudly. It's said that if you were ever to encounter the dread Nuckelavee to find the nearest fresh body of water, this sickly creature of the sea is deathly afraid of fresh water, I guess. You'd think a creature with all that skin exposed wouldn't like salt water or the cold, but hey, there you go, to each their own. You do you, terrifying skinless monster horseman. Number 3, a Chennu. A Chennu is an Algonquin creature of folklore a bit similar to a Wendigo, but with some fun regional twists. While both creatures hunt in wooded northern areas, and are both commonly associated with the wintertime, a Wendigo is usually depicted as a stretched out, emaciated monster, whereas a Chennu is depicted as being massive, very furry, and only getting larger and larger the more it eats. Actually, reading that back now, I realize that's not terribly impressive. Most things get larger and larger as they eat. Much like a Wendigo though, a Chennu is thought to have been formerly a man who was turned into a beast, either through their greedy ways, refusing to feed the starving, or for those who give in to the darkest of temptations and consume human flesh willingly. A Chennu is described as looking like a cross between an old man and a beast, large and imposing in appearance, with big chunks of their own flesh missing, possibly self-inflicted. They cover themselves in the forest, hiding themselves with leaves, bark, snow, pine needles, until they look like a horrible lint roller of the woods that walks upright. Interestingly, unlike a Wendigo, it's thought that the process of turning into a Chennu can actually be reversed. There's some good news. In some folk tales, the way to cure a Chennu is a special medicine that can cause them to vomit up their frozen heart and vomit up the flesh that they've consumed, causing the afflicted to revert back to their human form in a sight that is no doubt disgusting for everybody. But if this isn't possible, if you don't have this medicine on hand, or it's just not feasible to trick a Chennu, you can also get it to eat salt, which will apparently melt it from the inside. Poor Chennu. You're forced to live a tormented existence as a snow monster, isolated from your former friends, doomed to hunt on your former species, consuming only the darkest meat available, and you can't even order a little bit of salt for your dinner, eating a totally flavorless diet. I got nothing but sympathy for you, Chennu. Number 3, Kamataichi. I think it's really fascinating what each culture's cryptids look like, you know? Each culture creates cryptids and they all put their fun little spins on it, and whenever I get to make these videos, I learn all sorts of really cool mythological stuff that I'd never heard of before, and I sincerely hope you get that out of these videos too. I'd never heard of this next one, the Kamataichi, but I am obsessed with it now. Coming to us from Japan, this yokai, which is like a Japanese type of demon, appears like a weasel except with razor sharp sickle-like claws, like a real-life Sneasel from Pokemon. I'm actually amazed there's no Pokemon directly based on a Kamataichi. They seem like perfect for it. They have spiny fur, similar to a hedgehog, like prickly little needles, but they bark like a dog, and their claws could not be any sharper, and they're sickle-shaped. And also, a lot of depictions of them are downright adorable. These funny little creatures are extremely lightweight and have learned how to ride the currents of the wind to travel. They honestly sound kind of like radical in like a California surfer way. The legends of the Kamataichi come out of the Chubu region of Japan, when vicious cold winds were so powerful they would cut people down directly. And these legends would take the form of the spirit called the Kamataichi, which was the winds themselves as this furry little miscreant. It would attack at your legs, causing you to fall down, exposed and helpless, while it sucked at your blood. It's said that no blood occurs from their woundings because of this, as a Kamataichi moves so quickly and sucks it all up. That's almost considerate of it, doesn't leave a stain. These creatures move so quickly, and they're so good at hiding, that they're apparently completely invisible to the naked eye, appearing as nothing more than a sharp, freezing wind on your skin. Amusingly, there's some debate as to whether or not a Kamataichi's true origin is actually nothing more than a silly pun. There's a stance samurai would use called a Kamatachi, translating loosely to sword stance, which would explain, you know, it's a sharp thing. I don't know where the stance comes in, but it's sharp. However, there are legends all throughout Japan, throughout many regions, all telling stories of creatures that ride the wind and attack humans, and the sickle weasel remains among the most popular and among the most adorable. Sorry, Kamataichi, you are just so cute. If anybody knows where to get like a stuffed toy of this little guy, please comment under the video. I need to know. Number 1, the Yeti. Coming in at the number 1 spot, a mainstay of any trip to the mountain, the Yeti. I mean, who else could possibly take the number 1 spot on a list about winter cryptids? Maybe Rudolph the Red-Nosed Reindeer. Does he count as a cryptid? I guess he was. Maybe he's more like a mutant. Anyway, a Yeti is an American manufacturer specializing in outdoor products such as ice coolers, vacuum insulated drinkware, and I'm reading the wrong one. Sorry. Let's do that again. A Yeti refers to an ape-like creature thought to live in the mountains in the Himalayas, standing upright like a man and walking on 2 legs, and is usually pretty big, like 8 feet tall, with long arms, broad feet, and long brownish hair and sunken eyes. It kind of sounded a bit like me, to be honest. While it's pretty common to draw a Yeti as just being like a big giant white gorilla, they're actually pretty different, and most traditional depictions of a Yeti color it with darker fur. They're probably one of the oldest cryptids out there that's still talked about so fondly, with stories of Yetis going all the way back to 326 BC, when Alexander the Great sought out to capture one to see for himself while he was conquering the Indus Valley, although he was told that no Yeti could survive at an altitude low enough to meet him, and Alexander wept, for there were no more Yetis left to conquer. It's got several names. It's sometimes called a Sasquatch, or in the West it's popularly referred to as an abominable snowman, although that's a term by British officers who were stationed in the Himalayas, as no natives to the regions call it that. The name Yeti possibly comes from the Tibetan words Yete, meaning a man-like animal, or from Meti, meaning bear in some Nepalese and Tibetan dialects, which would make a good bit of sense, as it's thought that a number of Yeti sightings over the years that led to it being such a widely recognized cryptid could actually just be bear sightings being mistaken in the frosty air. In fact, there's a theory that Yeti sightings are from hybrid polar bears that had bred with grizzly bears, which has been recorded to happen, just not really anywhere where Yeti sightings are really made, so kinda up in the air. In Sherpa tradition, it's said that a Yeti is a powerful, mystical being, and a Yeti can choose to whom it will make itself visible to, choosing to only appear to those who believe in it. So if you're ever trekking the Himalayas and worried about an attack, here's a little advice for you: just don't believe in it. Although there are a good number of people who believe that the Yeti are an intelligent enough species that just want to be left alone to their own devices, living peacefully in the mountains. Not so abominable after all. Number 5, Kamataichi. I love doing videos and lists like these ones because I get to spend a lot of time researching into these different cultures and cryptids I never really would have known about without these opportunities, so thanks for watching stuff like this so I can keep on doing them. That's my greedy reason behind it. I just like learning. Our first cryptid from the land of the rising sun is going to be the Kamataichi. This yokai appears as a weasel with razor-sharp sickle-like claws. If you're a Pokemon head, big Pokemon fan, Sneasel from 2nd Gen, the Dark Ice type, he's based on a Kamataichi. They've got spiny fur, similar to a hedgehog, and they bark like a dog, and they have razor-sharp claws. These adorable, funny little guys are extremely lightweight, lighter than the wind itself even, and as such, travel by gusts of wind soaring through the sky like they're radical, furry little windsurfers. Legends of the Kamataichi first came about in the Chubu region of Japan, notorious for its icy sharp winds that were so powerful they would blow men over. These legends then took the form of the Kamataichi, the winds literally personified as this little vermin miscreant. It attacks you in the legs and it knocks you over. You're all exposed exposed and helpless, well, it picks away at your vitals with its little sickle hands. These creatures are surgical when they strike. A Kamataichi sucks away and feeds on any of the gore left behind by their wounds. These creatures are said to be totally stealthy, impossible to see with the naked eye, and blend into their surroundings well. And here's some pedantic little wordplay trivia. I know all the kids at home love pedantic wordplay trivia. There's some debate as to whether or not Kamataichi's name is nothing more than a cheesy pun. There's a stance that old sword fighters in Japan would use called Kamataichi, translating loosely to sword stance, and well, you can see if you just literally squish those two sounds together. And if you're looking for way more cryptid content, creepy tales, true stories, fake stories, aliens, conspiracies, horror movies, and basically just about everything weird and freaky that could possibly happen on this world, Top 5 Scary is the place to be. So hit subscribe, ring that bell when you do, and stay scared. But also stay watching this video, okay? Nothing I love more than seeing you guys watch them all the way to the end. Now let's keep going. Number 4, Teke Teke. Coming in next is gonna be a fairly newer urban legend, but it gripped me so much I had to include it in this. It's the Teke Teke. Teke Teke is a legend about the ghost of a student who was slain when she fell onto a railway line, where she was then split in half by a train. No easy way to say that, might as well just get it out of the way. Much like an Onryo, which, hold on to that thought for now, we're gonna come back to that in a minute. She's a vengeful spirit of a wronged woman who lurks train stations at night, stalking out for her victims. She drags herself across the ground using her arms, dragging the spine sticking out of her torso, scraping across the ground, making a horrifying ticka 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 sound from where she gets her name. And you thought that was just like a cute little sounding name, didn't you? Nope. Try if you can. Just try to get the mental image out of your head of a ghost girl clawing along on just her hands and elbows and her spine following along behind her. She's also carrying a giant sickle with her, so there's that too. She's really not much of a farmer, so I'll tell you right now, she's not using that for crops. If she finds you, Teke Teke will chase you and slice you in half. Whoops. Some variations say that she only takes your legs, which I guess is better, but really not by much. There's a specific variation of the legend that gives Teke Teke a bit more backstory for her origin, saying her name is Kashima Raiko, and she's a specific entity. She died when her legs were severed from her body, and the next part gets a bit creepy, so you might want to grab onto something, maybe put a little salt circle around your computer. It's said that when an individual learns of Kashima's story, she'll appear to you within the next month. So start timing now, I guess. Kashima Raiko is said to haunt bathroom stalls asking where her legs have gone. If you answer in a way she doesn't approve of, she'll take them from you. Incredibly bizarrely, most of all, this isn't the only bathroom themed horror story on this list, and I'm not joking, so we'll talk about that in a minute, but in the meantime sit tight and wait what I could possibly mean. Number 3, Kamakiri. Something I really like about reading about Japanese yokai and their mythological monsters when you read about a bunch of them is that they tend to kind of fall into 2 categories, you know? It's either the most terrifying thing I have ever heard in my life, a story of a malevolent spirit that's been wronged and will haunt you and do something unspeakable for a painful death, or they're just like weird little goblins or like weird little ghouls that go around doing silly little things. The Kamakiri is one of the silliest little demons I have ever read about, so that's why I'm including them, because they're hilarious. A Kamakiri looks like a weird little bird, like a little bird monster, with a razor sharp beak and very pointed claws. They're teeny tiny and very sneaky to move undetected. So what does the dreaded Kamakiri do? Are you ready for this? Hold on to something because this is going to terrify you. It breaks into your house at night and it cuts your hair. They hide in your roof and they wait at night for the perfect moment to strike, and then they go in and they just mess up your perfect do. They layer it all weird. They cut the ends right off. They frost your tips and they go after anyone, okay? They're not picky. If you've got a head of hair, they want to snip it up. Only the baldies are safe now. They wait until you're asleep. And if you're wondering, you're just sitting there like, why would anyone tell a story about this monster? Why would anyone make this up? It was in periods of Japanese history when long hair was really the only fashion and accepted hairstyle. I would have done great. So the idea of a nobleman having his hair cut in the middle of the night was like spine chilling. These days though, it just makes Kamakiri sound like he's like a college prankster than it does a real monster. But that's only half of why I thought this creature was so funny. Aside from the split end touch-ups, a Kamakiri cutting your hair is said to be a sign that the victim is about to unknowingly marry a yokai. Shapeshifters like Yorigumo or Kitsune can trick trick young men into marriage. So the Kamakiri steps in and he cuts your hair to let you know you might accidentally end up marrying a demon spider shapeshifter woman. And I just got paid to say that sentence out loud. We made it, Ma. Kamakiri, you might win the top 5 scary award for one of the funniest cryptids we've ever talked about on the channel. A solid number 2 compared to my true favorite, Akaname, the demon that comes into your bathroom and eats waste, which I guess would make him number 2. That's the rudest joke I'll ever tell on this channel. I'm so sorry. You guys can cut that if you want. Okay, moving on. Number 2, Akamanto. The Akamanto, also known as the Red Cloak, is a masked spirit and may very well be one of the most evil, weird creatures I've ever heard described in folklore, so just wait till you get a load of this. Now, like any good folktale, there are some local variations in how Akamanto operates, but the elements that remain consistent across all tales are that the Akamanto preys on you during your most personal moments. You know, he tends to come for kings who sit on a porcelain throne. He visits you in the smallest room in the house. He catches you with your pants down. This demon comes for you when you're on the toilet, if that isn't quite getting across yet. I didn't know how to just say it. The Akamanto then offers you a deadly choice, pulls a little matrix on you, and it asks you to choose between red toilet paper or blue toilet paper. Kind of like that one scene from Squid Games with the guy offering the paper. Actually, a little funny trivia, the creator of Squid Games confirmed this monster is what inspired that scene. So a little symbolism about that you didn't know about before, and now you do. Now, it's all a trick question, of course. Neither of the toilet papers this ghastly spirit has for you are anything like the Royale kittens. The red paper means you'll find yourself all cut up, leaving behind quite a mess, and the blue option means you'll be left gasping for air, clean but slow and painful. The only way to escape the Akamanto's dreaded game is to tell him you've got enough, actually, and thanks for asking, but you're good. No, really, you just have to ignore him. Tell him you're good, or flush quick and hightail it out of there. You know, don't play it smart with him. Don't ask him for purple. Don't ask him for sandpaper. No wise guy answers. He's a toilet paper demon. He doesn't want to hear any of that. It's said that if you mess with him, you mess with the Akamanto, he drags you feet first into the underworld. At least he doesn't flush you. Why did they make that? Why did the backstory behind the toilet paper demon? I do not know. Okay, number 1, Onryo. And our number 1, I went with the Onryo. And Onryo translates almost literally to a vengeful spirit, and in every definition of the words, that statement rings true. They're also sometimes called hatred spirits, because an Onryo is specifically a ghost of someone who is capable of causing grievous harm to the living. Onryo are almost always depicted as women who were wronged in their life. They're not exclusively women, but majority of them are. They were traumatized by their death, and they spend the rest of their days exacting revenge. God forbid women do anything fun, huh? Nailing down exactly what an Onryo is capable of is difficult, because there are so many countless interpretations of the vengeful spirit. But just know at home that nothing good ever comes out of crossing an Onryo. You can expect things like sleep paralysis, telekinesis, curses, evil magic. Like I said, really nothing good. It's worth noting that as part of the legend of an Onryo, her vengeance can never be satisfied, no matter how many enemies she fells in her wake. An Onryo will go after her lovers, family, whoever she had the most lingering pain for. And after she's done with that, well, she'll just attack indiscriminately. You gotta do something with the day, right? Onryo are a very traditional Japanese story, popping up in a lot of performance art pieces like No, Kabuki, and Rakugo, and they even continue to be the center stage in modern works. Probably the most famous Onryo I think most Westerners would know about is Sadako Yamamura from The Ring, otherwise known as Samura if you only saw the American version, and if you have, you gotta fix that at some point for me, okay? And Onryo traditionally is described as wearing a white barrio kimono. She's got wild, unkempt, long black hair obscuring her face, and in stage plays with dramatic white and blue paint, so just, she looks like the girl from The Ring, basically. And how does one stop an Onryo? Oh, you don't. Yeah, there's nothing. Once she's coming for you, she's coming for you, so, you know, be nice. Just be nice to the ladies in your life and hope that they never come back as vengeful revenge spirits. Number 5, Menangle. Starting off of our list of horrifying cryptids that would have the devil checking underneath his bed is the Menangle, a demonic vampire spirit of the Philippines. Now, there is a good chance that I am horribly mispronouncing that name. My Tagalog ain't quite what it used to be. Just being a big vampire creature would be enough to earn a spot on this list, but the Menangle doesn't settle for just the bare minimum. Oh, no. This creep turns it up all the way. Listen to me describe this monster and tell me that it wouldn't be out of place in Elden Ring attacking you in the horrible wastes of Caelid. The Menangle is a humanoid bat creature hybrid. And a quick aside, while I was doing some research for this video, I found it really interesting that nearly every culture has their own variation of a humanoid bat cryptid. There's the Ahul in Indonesia, Kongamato in some African regions, and Bruce Wayne in North America. The Menangle has giant leathery bat wings, which it uses to sweep through the night, grabbing its prey and fleeing off. And we haven't even started talking about the Menangle's namesake and action feature. Its name comes from the Tagalog word tangle, which means to separate, with its full name roughly translating to one who separates itself. Well, whatever does that mean? Well, it's because this nightmare creature can split itself in half, taking to the skies as a disembodied torso with flapping bat wings screeching around. Can you even imagine how soul-stoppingly scary it would be to see a giant bat monster flying around with like its entrails just hanging out for everybody to see, hanging loose like an old man in a gym shower? Its favorite prey is couples, young newlyweds in love, and also people who are sleeping. No respect from this thing. You shouldn't attack sleeping lovers. If you're hearing this and you're locking your doors, a Menangle is said to be thwarted by garlic. Now garlic will thwart it, but not slay it. I'm just glad I eat so much garlic and I'm very repugnant and I'm gonna be alone for the rest of my life, so I have no danger of Menangles. Now, if you want loads more cryptid content, we have got enough to fill up a zoo worth of the creepiest critters ever to crawl through the woods. Not your jam? We got aliens, monsters, movies, true crime, fake crime, and a lot of videos about a big shark. There's a little something to scare everybody. So hit that bell, stay subscribed, and stay scared. And please stay watching this video. I worked hard finding all these cryptids for you. Number 4, Jotagumo. One of you delightful little ghouls in a previous video left a comment suggesting this one for me, and I thank you so much for putting me on the trail of this cryptid. I wouldn't have heard about it before, so shout out to the Phantom Spectator for this one. The Jotagumo is a monster of Japanese folklore that's kind of like a succubus, but with a bit more of an arachnid twist. I can't say the name of what Jotagumo translates to and stay within YouTube guidelines, but just know that it is extremely funny. I will give you a hint. Oldest profession spider. Ask your parents. Jotagumo is considered a yokai, basically a Japanese demon. It's a powerful shapeshifter, maintaining the form of a beautiful young woman to seduce its prey and able to transform into a vicious spider to finish the job off. Well, what's she like to eat? Well, she has more acquired tastes than flies and grasshoppers. The Jotagumo likes young, handsome men who are lonely and looking for love. When in her humanoid form, she'll seduce them, invite them back to her lair, and well, you can probably guess how it goes. The folklore behind Jotagumo is fascinating. In Edo period Japan, spiders were considered to be mythical creatures with alien abilities, which, I mean, come on, totally reasonable. And it was said that the older a spider gets, the more powerful and potent its abilities would become, kind of like a wizard. A Jotagumo is a spider that's lived for hundreds of years to be able to shapeshift, and she doesn't even look a day over 25. Not bad. An old folktale tells the story of a woodcutter who fell in love with a woman he met at a waterfall. He visited her every day but grew weaker with each visit. A priest accompanied him one day, and when a spider thread reached out to the woodcutter, the priest yelled, warning the woodcutter that the woman he loved was a dreaded Jotagumo. Already ensnared by her spell, he persisted and ran towards the waterfall, where he was entangled in the web and never seen again. Number 3, the Beast of Exmoor. Whoa! With a name like the Beast of Exmoor, this thing's gotta be good, right? The Beast of Exmoor sounds like something you and a party of adventurers would set out to slay to restore peace and balance to Eternia. So what is the mighty Beast of Exmoor? Well, it's in Exmoor in the UK, which is a real place and not a fantasy castle, where it gets its name, and locals tell the story of a gigantic, elusive cat. In the 80s, there were all sorts of stories and sightings of a massive cat being described as similar to a puma or a panther being spotted around the Exmoor area. A farmer around the area claimed that he had lost over 100 sheep in his care, and all of them lost in strange, unnervingly violent ways. Injuries that looked like a feral creature had mauled them. Skin peeled back, skulls crushed, throats cut. This grew the notoriety of the elusive creature, and where all these sightings come from. People would claim that they'd see this huge beast like a black leopard stalking the plains. In fact, it was theorized for a while that it was possible that the Beast of Exmoor was a cougar or another big cat that had been owned by some sort of exotic collector, not naming any particular reality TV big cat owners, that had either gotten loose or let out into the wild to roam free, wreaking absolute havoc on an otherwise sleepy countryside. The problem got so bad that the Daily Express, which admittedly is a gossip rag, offered a cash reward for anyone who could bring the body of the Beast of Exmoor. Unfortunately, Geralt of Rivia was preoccupied, so no one was able to take this deal up. In 2006, a Devon farmer noticed the bones presence of a puma on his estate, which is odd, as there are very few pumas roaming the British countryside. There's cougars, yes, there's a lot of cougars in Great Britain and the UK, but I wouldn't consider Catherine Zeta-Jones a threat. So was the bones found the remnants of the Beast of Exmoor? Or does this elusive cryptid still stalk the night, attacking sheep? The frustrating thing about hunting a cat cryptid is there's no way it's gonna come when you call it. Best thing you can do is put out a big cardboard box and hope that it'll jump inside that, because it's a cat. Number 2, Goat Man. Okay, some of these cryptids have been a little grounded, realistic animals that got loose or whatever. I'm over that. We need one on this list that's just completely out there in every regard, supernatural and wild. So let's discuss the nastiest kid in Maryland, the Goat Man. Now, he might look a bit like Mr. Tumnus, beloved childhood character, but he is not taking you anywhere as nice as Narnia anytime soon, and he sure as heck don't got no Turkish delight for you. He manifests as a half-human, half-goat, a satyr of sorts, and sightings and descriptions describe him as having a goat's head and the body of a man. The legend of the Goat Man started down in Maryland, and is primarily where most of his legends come from, but he's also been sighted around Louisiana and Texas as well. We love a Goat Man that's well-traveled. Goats have been figures in myths and folklore for generations, with goats thought to be associated with Satan and demons, but the Goat Man himself is all Maryland. Depending on who's telling the story, he's just a supernatural entity that wanders the woods, or maybe he's a former goat farmer who became deranged after losing one too many goats and he's a madman in a costume. If that origin leaves a little bit to be desired, he's also got a fantastic comic book bad guy origin story where he's the product of a science experiment gone wrong to, I don't know, merge a man with a goat, I guess. Anyway, he breaks out of the lab Stranger Things style and creeps through the woods, hatchet in hand, attacking passersby dare disturb his territory with an axe. The Goat Man was a fairly popular campfire story and urban legend through the 70s and 80s amongst teenagers, where the creature was said to haunt Lover's Lane, looking for canoodlers where he'd split up the action with a sharp axe like he's Jason Voorhees with a set of horns. For any of my Maryland viewers, shout out for me. Is Goat Man still a big deal? Do the kids still tell stories about him? I love this guy, so I am curious. Number 1, the Hat Man. Now, a lot of these entries and stories and cryptids have been told for generations over and over, so I think it's only fitting that I get with the times a little bit and we start talking about a modern cryptid. The Hat Man is the most recently talked about cryptid on this list, if you can call it that. Is cryptid the right word for a shadow person? I don't know, but it's my list, and if anyone wants to correct me, the Hat Man is welcome to come down to the studio. Interestingly, almost everyone who reports seeing this mysterious Hat Man describes it almost exactly the same way. A spindly, tall, shadowy figure that is wearing a hat, hence the name. Some people see a top hat, some see an old, like, newsman's fedora. Everyone says his attire is out of date by a century or two, so no new era fitted on this guy. You can't see his face at all, just shadows, and the only thing you can make out are his dead, pinprick eyes, shining red in contrast to the darkness of the rest of his physique. And he is watching you. Now, what does the Hat Man do besides checking in on you at night? People who report seeing him appear to be people who are suffering from sleep paralysis or insomnia, and most sightings or reports describe him as being benign, if not terrifying. Watching you, studying you, what have you. There are some, however, who claim that he's not just a visitor and he's a little more sinister than that. Some people tell stories of getting an appearance from the Hat Man and feeling choked or burning sensations on their scalps or chest, or just feeling like a general overwhelming terror and nausea, which I think is totally reasonable if there was a shadow demon in the corner of my room watching me. Now, some people who've seen him claim that he feeds off your emotions, and that the people who are visited by the Hat Man are those who are already struggling with something like great stress or mental illness, which is probably definitely not made better by a shadow demon. Sometimes people in the same family claim that they can see him. So what's he doing? Is he targeting specific people, or is it certain emotions that he hungers about? Thinking about him already is enough to make my hair stand on end and squint at the coat rack in my room when I turn the lights off. I think I'm gonna sleep with just the lights on tonight, just to like be safe and make sure my cats don't bump into anything or anything.
Number 5, Bigfoot. Bigfoot is perhaps the most famous cryptid this side of the Loch Ness Monster. He is found in the forests of North America and is often described as a bipedal, large, muscular, ape-like creature who is covered in dark red, brown, or black hair. Sightings of these incredible creatures have been reported for centuries, with variations of this creature appearing in several indigenous tales and legends, and reports of Spanish explorers claiming to see some circling their camp in the 16th century. Ever since then, sightings of the creature have been a consistent but often unprovable sight, with only ever grainy footage and blurry photographs being presented as evidence. Some people believe that these sightings can be explained as bears that have been mistaken for other creatures, or even escaped apes from zoos who have taken up residence in the forests. Of course, there are also a fair amount of hoax sightings where it turns out to be a man in a costume trying to get attention or sell their fraudulent photos. But is there really a secret species in the forests of North America? With so many sightings that can't be explained, it's hard to not at least keep an open mind.
Next up, we have the Loveland Frog. Hailing from Loveland, Ohio, this massive-sized creature is said to resemble a humanoid frog, walking on two legs and standing at just over 4 feet tall. So I say massive, but I'm talking massive by frog standards here. What's great about this particular cryptid is that there have been multiple spotted at once. The very first sighting happened back in 1955, where a man spotted what he described as 3 short humanoid creatures with frog-like faces under a bridge. One of them also had a bar-like wand device that emitted sparks, leaving a scent of alfalfa and almonds. What an oddly specific smell to describe. There weren't any other reported sightings of this creature for another 17 years, but these 2 sightings happened in a span of just 2 weeks and were both reported by police officers. I always get more interested in cryptid or paranormal accounts when police officers report on it. It's not like it's, Chuck from the hardware store being like, yeah, I saw a frog man. Sure, cops have lied. I think we all know that. But making a report about spotting a frog monster in the middle of the road is, it's an odd thing for a cop to lie about. Anyway, the second sighting happened on March 3rd, 1972, where Officer Ray Shockeye, what a name there, eh? Ray Shockeye, spotted a 4-foot-tall humanoid creature with leathery skin and a froggish face, which he saw hop over a guardrail into the Little Miami River. The second sighting happened 2 weeks later, where an officer named Mark Matthews, boring name, spotted what he thought was the same creature before firing at it and missing. This is said to be a false version of the report, with the official one being that he did hit the creature only to discover that it was a large iguana and not a mutated frog monster, but that seems far less likely to me. I smell a cover-up. It needs to be solved. Later on in the month, a local farmer also claimed to have seen the elusive creature, so there you go. So look, I'm a total frog freak. I love the little hoppy guys, and I, for one, much hope that this thing exists, and I think it does. If I ever find myself a trip to Ohio, I'm driving straight to Loveland, where I'm just gonna scour every pond there is with a giant net, and I'm gonna catch him.
Number 3. Mothman. The next cryptid is said to have spent his time around West Virginia in the mid to late 60s, scaring locals and possibly even predicting local tragedies before they happened. In November of 1966, 2 grave diggers were practicing their trade in a cemetery in Clendenin, West Virginia. It was a dark and stormy night, but these men had worked in a graveyard for many years and were not easily spooked. Or so they thought. When they looked up into one of the trees, they saw a strange man-like figure perched in its branches, watching them. He had glowing red eyes and gigantic 10-foot wings, and even after the initial shock wore off of the gravediggers, they reported feeling an intense sense of dread and foreboding due to his presence. A few days later, 2 young couples were making a day trip in their car near Point Pleasant. While they were driving near a former military munitions site, a figure matching the description given by the gravediggers swooped down from the sky and started to chase the vehicle. As sightings of the creature continued to come in over the next year, the creature was dubbed the Mothman by the local papers. Some of the locals believed that the Mothman was living in a vacant nuclear power plant outside of Point Pleasant and was possibly the escaped product of some kind of accident or secret government experiment. The dread-inducing encounters and sightings suddenly came to a stop in December 1967 when the Silver Bridge, which carried US Route 35 over the Ohio River, suddenly collapsed due to a faulty suspension wire and the weight of rush hour traffic. 46 people lost their lives in the tragic accident, and the Mothman suddenly disappeared. This led to theories that the Mothman showed up before disasters as a horrifying omen of approaching doom, with similar creatures being reported in other places before disasters, creatures, such as in Chernobyl, prior to the famous disaster there. Is this creature really an omen of approaching doom? Or is there some other explanation for this terrifying and dreadful apparition that terrorized the inhabitants of the Point Pleasant area in West Virginia?
There is said to be a strange creature stalking the swamplands of Lee County, South Carolina, that being a big 7-foot-tall lizard man. On the 14th of July, 1988, sheriffs of Lee County were called to inspect damage done to a vehicle parked outside a home right next to the Scape Ore Swamp. The vehicle had large tooth marks and scratches on it. Once the story hit the news, a teenage boy by the name of Christopher Davis came out to make his own report to the police, saying that just 2 weeks prior, his car had been damaged, only he had actually seen the person, or rather the thing, that was responsible. Yes, it was our titular lizard man. Christopher described the creature to be a massive, 7-foot-tall creature with 3 fingers per hand, red eyes, and green, wet, scaly skin. He had been driving home from work one night when he got a flat tire. When he got out of his car to fix it, he saw the creature making his way towards him. Abruptly got in his car and started driving off, but the creature was so fast that it caught up to him, driving at 64 kilometers an hour. That's about 40 miles per hour for the Americans in the audience. And Lizard Man is now on the roof of his car, scratching at it. Christopher quickly hit the brakes, causing the monster to fly off his vehicle before finally making his escape. When news of this report hit the papers, it caused a frenzy. Lizard Man was the talk of the town. More and more reports started coming in. The local radio station offered a $1 million reward to whoever could catch the beast, so hunters started flocking to town to try and catch it. Stores in the area began selling Lizard Man t-shirts. It was Lizard Mania! And local sheriffs began writing off the supposed encounters as bear sightings, because if there are two things that look eerily similar, it's definitely a furry bear and a big green scaly lizard monster with red eyes and no hair to speak of. A bear? That's the best they could come up with? I'm not buying it.
Number 1. The North American house hippo. Our next cryptid is one that every school child in Canada has heard of and has spent many a sleepless night worrying that they will cross paths with. These strange and frightening creatures bring an aura of terror that cannot ever be truly understood by people in a foreign country. However, I will try to help you understand what it is we are dealing with. Imagine, if you will, it's nighttime, in a kitchen just like yours. All is quiet, or is it? The North American house hippo is found throughout Canada and the eastern United States. House hippos are very timid creatures and are rarely seen, but they will defend their territory if provoked. They come out at night to search for food, water, and materials for their nests. The favorite foods of the house hippo are chips, raisins, and crumbs from peanut butter on toast. They build their nests in bedroom closets, using lost mittens, dryer lint, and bits of string. The nests have to be very soft and warm. House hippos sleep for about 16 hours a day. House hippos are extremely hard to spot. They enjoy admiring their reflections, hoarding socks, helping themselves to your devices, and annoying your pets. They're small creatures, only about the size of a hamster, and chances are most Canadians have one living in their household and don't even know it. House hippos are extremely intelligent, which is why they are rarely, if ever, found caught in mouse traps or other devices meant to capture typical household vermin. The house hippo is so rarely seen that many people believe that the creature is simply an elaborate hoax. But the rare person to encounter these creatures will never forget the sounds they make before charging and attempting to bite off one of your toes. Just how many house hippos are out there, and where did they come from? We may never know for certain.
In 5th place, we have flying monkeys. Yep, you heard me right. Well, The Wizard of Oz might be one of my all-time favorite films. Heck, I've even cosplayed Dorothy alongside my childhood Toto plush. It took me a while to wrap my head around this sighting. Darla of Jacksonville, Florida, experienced this event in May of 2017 that left her completely bewildered. She was driving on a neighborhood street and a strange animal was on the roadway. She could see its head and it looked kind of like a monkey, but it was smaller, similar in size to a prairie dog or a gopher. She found herself repeating, "What on earth is that?" to her friend that was in the car with her as she drove around it, seeing as it wasn't moving and was possibly dazed by the headlights on her vehicle. I'm hoping she didn't have her high beams on because they fry out my eyes, so I don't want to imagine what it would do to a little critter. Her friend thought it was like a possum at first, until they passed it and agreed that it definitely didn't resemble a possum, but they still couldn't come to a consensus on what it was. Darla turned the vehicle around, and all she could see were wings that seemed way too large for the size of what she had seen flying away. Now, the logical part of her brain took over and deemed whatever the heck it was too big to be an owl, so maybe it was snatched up in the sky by an owl? At this point, we've named off every similar creature in the same size range. Darla pulled over to mentally dissect what she had just seen to try and make sense of it. It was a being that was kinda on the smaller size, with a head, a neck, the ability to stand solidly on two legs, oh, and with extremely large wings. I was gonna say, that was almost my description. If anyone has any solid guesses, feel free to let me know in the comments. She knew that the nearby Walmart had monkeys living in the parking lot after independent owners let them escape, leaving her confused for eternity. All that comes to my brain after that description, for me personally, is the damn IKEA monkey, but wearing like a Wizard of Oz evil witch uniform instead of the oversized coat. I'm glad Darla managed to avoid any harm to herself or to her vehicle, but I know I'll be wondering exactly what the heck that creature would be for the rest of the night. Yeah, I got nothing. In fourth place, we have a manananggal from the Philippines. I swear I do look up how to pronounce new words, but my tongue just doesn't like them on occasion, and sometimes I get led astray by false pronunciation videos. Two young women in Talisay City are positive that they spotted this creature. The name comes from the Tagalog word tanggal, which means to remove or to separate. Oh, for those of us who aren't experts on this creature, it's a being whose upper body separates from its lower body, possesses fangs and wings that give them a vampire-like appearance, and resides exclusively in the Philippines. This creature is said to favor preying on sleeping pregnant women, using an elongated proboscis-like tongue to suck the hearts of fetuses or the life source of someone who is sleeping. Now, as usual, local police are trying desperately to cover up this spotting, but thanks to social media, that's getting harder and harder for them to do. And we all know I hate a cover-up. Our two witnesses went to a neighbor's house to get a Wi-Fi connection, and afterwards, while they were returning to their own home, they spotted the manananggal on top of a roof of a neighbor's house. Now, the neighbor in question sadly didn't bear witness to the majestic creature, just both women shouting and crying. Police also interviewed another neighbor, whose house is close to this first neighbor's home, and he claimed to see the same thing. You know, the girls were shouting and crying, but nothing in the sky. Seeing as we have photographic evidence though, I'll let you lovely folks out there in the interwebs form your own opinions down in the comments. In third place, we have a winged humanoid. I swear the entire list isn't going to be winged beings, I promise. Come on, don't you folks trust me by now? Look at this face. I don't think I've ever led y'all wrong. Chicago-based private investigator Manuel Navarrete was hanging out with his friends in a bakery parking lot on February 5th of this year, just chatting and vibing, as one does, when the group noticed something standing on top of the flea market across the parking lot. It looked like a pitch-black, 7-foot-tall man with wings that were wider than a car and red eyes that were as bright as taillights. The creature was observing Manuel and his buddies closely, making chirping noises that the group could hear clearly from the distance they were at, which was around 50 yards away even without the height difference. Now, the group continued their staring contest with the being for almost 10 minutes before it flew straight into the air and over the group of dudes, watching them the entire time. The men fought the temptation to run, not wanting to lead the creature anywhere or trigger like a prey response. They estimate the entire encounter happened between 11 to 11:30 p.m., and it was a rather clear evening, so there was no chance of clouds warping what they saw. I'll leave you folks with something fun to ponder over. This is the 8th confirmed sighting reported in that area since 2017, and no one is positive what the heck this creature is, just that it's out there. In second place, we have a Glimmer Man in Chicago. See, I told y'all. No more winged whatevers. The only connection this encounter has to the last one is that they were both based out of Chicago, but in different areas of the city and took place within the last year. Other than that, no relation. Stella's experience took place on September 2nd of 2022, after a day of running errands for her elderly father, when she had returned to his apartment building and 6th floor residence. She went out on the balcony for a cigarette break, just standing and allowing her mind to go blank, when she noticed a weird large tree around 20 feet away. Yes, I'll obviously elaborate. One of the branches on the tree was bowing quite heavily, but Stella couldn't see anything on it that could be responsible for weighing it down. So as she was staring at the branch and trying to make sense of what her eyes were seeing, an intense feeling of dread and fear came over her, as if every part of her body was screaming at her to turn around and run, but she didn't know why. At this very moment, the bowing branch that she had just been observing began to shake violently, and despite her internal instincts still screaming at Stella, leave, curiosity had now gotten the better of her, and she started to move along the railing to get a closer look. As your friendly narrator, this is where I interject and tell anyone with some sense to, run! But hey, what do I know? It's not like I talk about this for a living. A small form began to glimmer on the branch, and as Stella continued to watch in shock, a transparent human figure that shimmered a yellowish-whitish color developed. Stella snapped out of her fixated state stare and quickly took a step back from the railing, realizing finally that this is something that maybe should be feared. Glad the old common sense kicked in after the overwhelming fear, dread, and visual should have kicked in sooner in my opinion, but that's just my usual snark kicking in. The shimmery being eventually dropped out of the tree, landing behind a man who happened to be walking past at the time. Now the walking man spun around, his reaction similar to as if he had been hit with an object from behind, and was confused when all he saw was a cloud of smoke. Oh, by the way, the shimmery man had disappeared in the puff of smoke almost instantly after hitting the ground. Now Stella waited for some time, expecting to see this thing re-emerge from the dust or smoke, but it was completely gone. At the same time, another neighbor just a few floors below Stella and her dad had also observed exactly the same thing as her and managed to confirm all the same details. Now the neighbor and Stella then managed to track down the man who was walking past a few hours later, and after a conversation, confirmed that he had felt the weird impact, the overwhelming dread, but didn't see anything. Stella is positive that the Glimmerman still roams the area, often feeling the overwhelming emotions from the day whenever she visits her dad, but hasn't spotted it since. My heart goes out to her, and I hope whatever it is buggers off soon for her sake. In our first place, we have an aquatic cryptid in Vancouver. I swear ending today's video on a Canuck tale wasn't planned, but when it works, it works. Taylor Wallace is a private investigator based out of BC who was hired to find evidence of a person that's gone missing without a trace, only to find after a more than 6-year investigation evidence of large clawed creatures that could very well be eating people. The photos he has provided as proof show a large claw print in the sand that was found among others next to a headless seal that he discovered in 2016. So a large claw print cut into solid stone that was found in 2022, a cave made by something with large claws that has a red fluid-soaked entrance with a red claw print on the cave wall above it, and 3 separate scat samples from a large animal, believed to be one of these creatures, one of which contains very much what looks like a human fingernail. The area these were found in was a couple hundred feet around a lake from the public beach, and there were dozens and dozens of large claw marks coming out of the water and onto shore in various places that didn't belong to any kind of water creature that he could identify. Heck, after staring at them for quite a while myself, and with the knowledge I have of, beings at this point, the only thing in my brain that they look like are velociraptor claws. And I know that's not right. Not unless these photos came from Isla Nublar without telling anyone. Now, Taylor has been returning regularly to the beach in question and has gathered multitudes of more evidence each time. He sadly found another decapitated seal and copious amounts of evidence of a large aquatic creature that's coming out of the ocean on a daily basis to feed on seals, ducks, and snow geese. Not only are there large digs and claw prints in the hard ground everywhere, made by a creature with, big claws, but the remains of dead animals are all over the park. Coyotes are the largest predators in the area, and he's never seen one in that park. But the claw prints are way too big to be coyotes or even just like a large dog. These digs are much bigger than even bears or cougars, and you don't even see those in the area. Okay, not gonna visit Vancouver anytime soon. I'll stick to the natural predators here in Toronto. Oh, and crappier evidence, in that nearby park, he's collected those 3 separate scat samples that I mentioned earlier, and he's hoping that that human fingernail that he found in one of them is from the missing human that he's been looking for years, so we can stop visiting this area and seeing all this weird stuff. Now, interestingly enough, where he's found evidence of these creatures, it matches up with the locations of people who have gone missing without a trace. Alrighty folks, check up on your BC friends and warn them to not go swimming alone anytime soon, or walk in any parks. Yikes. Number 5, Bigfoot or the Devil. Our first account for the day comes from scientist Jim Brittle and his cousin and takes place near Johnson City, Tennessee. Granted, every story I'll be recounting today comes from scientists, so I suppose I won't have to state that every time, but I wanted to make sure, that I made it clear from the get-go. So Jim and his cousin were out hunting, as one does, and found themselves sitting on the side of the wall of a rather large hollow, which consisted of very thick underbrush and lots of evergreen trees in a valley that led first to a clearing and then on to a supposed old graveyard. If I've said it once, I've said it a million times, don't mess around your graveyards, but here goes nothing. All of a sudden the duo heard the brush in the hollow below rattling and could tell that whatever was making the sounds was rather large. Jim had a firearm with him for safety, and using the night vision scope, he managed to make out what appeared to be a man at first, but he soon realized that the man was a creature about 7 to 8 feet tall, 450 pounds, covered in thick black fur with long tapered horns pointing straight up from either side of its head. Now, by this point, Jim and his cousin were terrified, so he fired off his weapon repeatedly before retreating into a nearby cabin. The next morning, all the two could find were a bucket load of spent shell casings and holes in a walnut tree. Nearby animal traps had been sprung and all the bait was gone. On a nearby ridge, the men located a series of tunnels made up of brush and various sizes of tree limbs, vines, and leaves, and pondered if it could be the beast's lair. But they didn't feel like tempting fate again to find out. They quickly returned home and never went into that area again, and thank goodness for that. Number 4. Mothman. Time to travel over to Waterville, Maine in late summer of 1971, where even I can't wrap my head around what happened. Dr. Sally Daniels was newly married and living in Killeen, Texas in a small duplex with her husband, who was in the Army. One night he was off duty while Sally was home alone in bed, and around 3 a.m. in the morning, otherwise known as witching hour, she woke up and saw a black figure standing at the bottom of her bed. She described it as 8 or 9 feet tall with huge big black wings and red eyes. Now, like any rational person, she tried closing her eyes and going back to sleep, or pretending it wasn't happening, but when she opened them again, the creature had moved to the right side of her bed. Sally was now frozen in fear, unable to scream, and darted under her blankets in a state of panic until the creature left. Shortly after this event, Sally moved to Maine because she was way too frightened to ever stay alone at night when her husband had duty. She had mentioned to her mom about seeing that huge black angel, and the mom was glad Sally came home as that didn't sound good. At the time, she had never heard of the Mothman, but a few years later, she came across an article and a drawing of one, finally giving her an answer as to what she saw that fateful night. Number 3. More Bigfoot. So now we travel over to southeast Oklahoma with a tale from Susan Paulson. It was just another day, and she was checking on the animals when the weather radio blared out a tornado warning. So at the time there was a large storm over the area, and an advisory was indeed in effect. So while she wasn't surprised, Susan quickly closed up the barn door and hurried towards the house, finding her offspring and husband. They got themselves into a shelter, barred the metal door, and sat waiting for the worst. About 5 minutes after they settled into the dugout, the wind started picking up outside, and the whole family could hear thunder and rain outside of the doors. It was soon joined by the impacts of large hail hitting the metal door as the sound of the wind changed to a roar similar to a plane about to take off. They could hear the different sounds of objects hitting the door, but particularly a loud crack and lots of scraping on the door. In total, the entire event lasted maybe 7 minutes, but the family didn't try to leave the dugout until the wind died down, which, it makes sense. Susan's husband unbarred the door and tried opening it, but it would only open about an inch. They could see through the crack that the apple tree next to the dugout had blown over in front of the door. And heck, they tried to pry the door open every which way, slamming their bodies against the door, but nothing worked. The family was completely stuck in the shelter, but they knew at some point there would be people checking on places in the tornado's path, so they stuck a piece of wood in the crack of the door to hold it open and got comfortable and prepared to wait. When 7 p.m. rolled around, they discovered that claustrophobia and panic attacks can strike anyone, no matter how prepared you are. So technically the family was safe and prepared physically for a week, but Susan's not sure their minds could have lasted a week. They could see it was dark through the crack of the door when a foul odor wafted in, smelling like a wet dog combined with a male goat and a teenager's armpits. Now Susan originally thought it was an overly pungent skunk, and she went to shut the door, but stopped when she heard what sounded like footsteps. The family started yelling for help, calling out to whoever was out there, but nobody responded. There was a shuffling sound, and the smell got even stronger, causing Susan's eyes to water as she yelled out and pounded on the door. She heard a grunt before the sound of footsteps, and the odor started fading away. Eventually the footsteps returned, and while everyone trapped, yelled and pounded on the door, once again there was no response, and the footsteps left once more. This time Susan felt uneasy and barred the door shut. Something just wasn't right with this person. At around 3 in the morning, are we sensing a pattern? Susan's daughter woke up from a nightmare and started crying, and Susan was comforting her when she heard branches cracking and scraping against the door along with grunting. She woke her husband up, and once again, they pounded on the door and yelled, this time leaving the door open as much as possible. Just a couple of inches, man. When the noises outside stopped, they waited about 10 minutes to try to open the door, and this time it opened enough for the family to be able to step out. The trunk of the tree was lying near the door, but there was a pile of branches off to the side, and in that ground outside, there were a lot of footprints bigger than any foot Susan had ever seen. After tucking the offspring in their proper beds, Susan headed out to the barn to see if the animals were okay, and was about halfway there when she heard one of their hogs screaming. She ran towards the barn, and a few yards away, she could see her market-ready Hampshire barrow struggling and screaming while slung over the shoulder of a dark, hulking, human-like figure. Susan yelled at the figure to drop her peg, and it just turned and stared. She shined her flashlight at the creature's face, revealing a grayish face with a flat-looking nose. It was covered with thin, dark brown hair all over its body and massive feet. After a few seconds, it turned and walked into the cornfield towards the creek and disappeared from view. Yay for saving everyone, but bummer about losing the livestock. Number 2, a glimmer man in Chicago. So Stella's experience took place on September 2nd of 2022 after a day of running errands for her elderly father, when she had returned to his apartment building and 6th floor residence. She went out onto the balcony for, smoke break. Just standing and allowing her mind to go blank when she noticed a weird large tree about 20 feet away. Yeah, I'll elaborate. So one of the branches on the tree was bowing quite heavily, but Stella couldn't see anything on it that could be responsible for the weighing down. As she was staring at the branch and trying to make sense of what her eyes were seeing, an intense feeling of dread and fear came over her, as if every part of her body was screaming at her to turn around and run, but she didn't know why. At this very moment, the bowing branch that she had just been observing began to shake violently, and despite her internal instincts still screaming at Stella to leave, curiosity had now gotten the better of her and she started to move along the railing to get a closer look. As your friendly narrator, this is where I interject and tell anyone with some sense to run, but hey, what do I know? A small form began to glimmer on the branch, and as Stella continued to watch in shock, a transparent human figure that shimmered a yellowish-white color developed. She snapped out of her fixated stare and quickly took a step back from the railing, realizing finally that this is something that should be feared. Glad the old common sense kicked in after the overwhelming fear, dread, and visual, should have kicked in sooner in my opinion, but that's just my usual snark kicking in. The shimmery being eventually dropped out of the tree, landing behind a man who happened to be walking past at the time. The walking man spun around, his reaction similar to, as if he had been hit with an object from behind, and was confused when all he saw was a cloud of smoke. The shimmery man had disappeared in said puff of smoke almost instantly after hitting the ground. Stella waited for some time, expecting to see this thing re-emerge, but it was completely gone. At the same time, another neighbor just a few floors below Stella and her dad had also observed exactly the same thing as her and managed to confirm all the same details. The neighbor and Stella then managed to track down the man who was walking past a few hours later, and after a conversation, confirmed that he had felt the weird impact, the overwhelming dread, but didn't see anything. Stella is positive that the Glimmer Man still roams the area, often feeling the overwhelming emotions from the day whenever she visits her dad, but hasn't spotted it since. My heart goes out to her, and I hope whatever it is buggers off soon. Number 1, not deer. I gotta say, I was definitely chuckling a bit at first when I was reading about the scripted, but, seeing as where I'm from, that's just another way to lead into conversation about seeing a moose on the highway. And while the thought of driving within eyesight of a moose is scary enough, not deer are actually scarier. So this report comes from Elias Merritt in Roanoke, Virginia. Describing the time of day as almost dark, he was waiting for a friend to meet him for dinner when he experienced a feeling of something or someone watching him. He turned around suddenly and saw what he described as the shadow of a man behind a bush, which caused him to flee to the other side of the street, hiding in an area where he felt safer but could still see, if his friend was coming. As he stood in this new position, Elias saw 2 deer along the edge of the woods and watched them as they moved, observing that one of the deer seemed to have a bad back leg or was just injured. He walked in their direction to get a better look and see if he could help, but as he got closer, he realized they weren't deer and froze, petrified. The beings had oddly shaped heads and appeared to have patches of hair stitched over human skin. Both of the creatures looked in the direction of Elias and slowly stood up on their back legs and began running towards him, chasing him to the point where he was simply running and yelling in the direction of who knows what, no longer worried about waiting for his friend. He eventually ran into said friend and in a panic told him the entire story. And what do you know? The friend turned pale and explained that several years prior, he had had a similar experience while hunting in the forest outside of town, with his descriptions of the creatures being almost identical to what Elias had seen. Not to sound like a broken record, but I'm really glad I've never been like the nature hiking type.